Helps if I unmute. I told you guys I would do that at least once during this entire month, so there is the one time. So welcome back, everybody. Happy Friday. I hope everyone had a great week so far. We're going to be rolling into class number 6 and before we get to the weekend. And as always, we do our normal announcements. So we are broadcasting on all 3 of the platforms. Majority of you are on our website. We also have folks out in the world of YouTube and Facebook. As always, we have our wonderful location. So if you have any questions at any point in time, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to an answer for you on those. And that could be anything from the course itself or the curriculum that we're teaching in real time here. We will also be covering some FAA test questions today. So for those that are on our website, remember that the vote button will become active. It's actually just on this side of my head. At the very, very bottom, right where it says type a message, when a question actually shows up, there will be a blue vote button. You're going to go ahead and click on that. We'll remind you. Most people are experts on that and can help you out as well. And for these, some of the questions are quite lengthy or wordy, so just remember we have a limitation in our system. We can't necessarily fit all of the characters in there, so if there's a ... or if it's just truncated and it's just cut off, just go ahead and reference the original text on the slide on the screen, which we'll leave up. We'll go ahead and leave it up for about 30 to 60 seconds, let everybody get their answers in, then we'll talk about it and discuss if necessary. For those that are following along, on Facebook or YouTube, we do not have the voting capability right now, so just go ahead and take a mental note of it, write it down on a piece of paper, and just don't give away the potential right or wrong answer to your fellow students, and that goes for basically everybody. We will be covering quite a bit of information, and we're going to basically pick up where we left off last time, which was our departure procedures. But a couple things that I can kind of give you a heads up for just to have ready is going to be your FAA testing supplement for the instrument. If you don't have a copy, you can just Google it, FAA testing supplement, and then find the instrument pilot version. Otherwise, if you're obviously on our website, just scroll all the way down and underneath the documents and download section, you'll find it. There are some graphs and charts that we're going to cover. And unfortunately, this is from the older set. And if you were to actually look at the published version of the FAA book, there's a brand new set, which is nice and crisp and clear. And then there's this older set, which looks like it's something from the 80s. And regardless of how much I zoom, it's blurry from the start. And unfortunately, that's not anything that we can fix here. That's actually something that the FAA came out and published. So they can be quite tricky, but I would encourage you to download that so you have the ability to zoom much more than I have the ability to show you guys on the screen, but you'll see exactly what I mean. Some are really nice and crisp. Some have that nice fuzz, that nice 80s fuzz look to them. But just want to make you aware of that. That's not the printing. That's basically how the FAA came out with that information. The other document that you're going to want to have in hand as well is we're going to be looking at the Southwest version of the TPP. We'll put a link up here very shortly with that if you just want to download that. It's a larger document, but when we cover our alternate airport scenarios and we also cover our takeoff minimums, I'm going to be kind of focusing in on some LA airports, so we want to basically be able to follow along with the charts, and we'll do it step by step. And please have a few pieces of paper to draw with. This is the day where we're going to actually be drawing ODPs. Remember, obstacle departure procedures, which we really haven't gotten into, are textual base, and it's very, very important. I'll show you some of the gotchas where you'll read it and you think one thing, but the procedure is actually having you do something else, and that's how people get violations quite easily. So make sure you have those 3 things, basically your FAA testing supplement, your TPP for the Southwest region, and also a couple blank sheets of paper to draw on, and we'll probably get into the drawing about after break here. So what is on the agenda for today? This is class number 6. We're halfway done through the course by the time we're done tonight, and we're going to be covering en-route procedures, charts, and holds. So we're definitely going to be finishing up the departure procedures. We'll talk about our alternates. We'll go over the obstacle departure procedures. We'll talk about SIDS, the standard instrument departure procedures, and we'll talk about the diverse vector area, DVAs, and then also the last one that I forgot to throw in there that we ran out of room is basically our climbs and holds in position, and the name, the 4-letter name escapes me right at this second. Then what we'll do is we'll switch gears and we'll start talking about the en-route chart symbology, and we'll probably get to that towards the latter third of the class here. We'll go over all of these acronyms, the minimum en route altitude, the MOCA, the OROCA, the MAA, the MRA. Where do we find these on your chart? So if you also have, I would say the 4th thing that you might want to have in your possession is if you have any type of en route chart, or maybe an iPad, or something with your electronic flight notebook, whether it's ForeFlight or some other product, You can follow along and actually look up exactly what we're looking at, and I'll have that obviously on the screen. And if you don't have that, you can just follow along with what I'm going to be showing you in real time, or use skyvector.com. Any of those resources work. We'll talk briefly about some of the differences between the NACO, which are basically the government charts, versus the JEP charts. And the main thing at the end of the day is that you're going to be tested on the government version for the written test, but when it comes to your actual check ride, you can use whatever you want. The DPE or the examiner could care less. Just make sure that you know how to utilize that product and read it. But just remember, there are no JEP charts on the actual written itself. We'll also cover our en-route procedure communications, so how we're supposed to talk on the radio, or lost communications procedures as well. Now, we are supposed to be covering IFR cruising altitudes and holding procedures. I do not really think I'm going to probably stop well before holding procedures. That is an hour-long discussion in itself. We'll probably save that for next week on Monday or Tuesday, depending on which class you're joining. So that is really the agenda for today. And before I forget the end of class, I hope everyone that is celebrating this weekend has a great Mother's Day. So hopefully you'll be well rested and well fed, and you'll be ready to rock and roll for the holds when we come to it early next week. So the other last minute things that I have, just as you all know, is we have the Private Pilot Ground School, which actually is starting on May 8th. That's the first class, is either Sunday or Monday, depending on the class that you choose. So if you do need a refresh, you know anybody that is interested in becoming a pilot, feel free to share that information. Runs the same schedule, 4 weeks, 12 classes. There's 4 different classes to choose from. It's either Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we have either an East Coast time at 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. East Coast, or 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific time, depending on whatever suits your schedule. All right, and then finally, the last thing that I'll do here is my little public service announcement that we're all familiar with. So there should be no surprises by the time we get to the course. There is no catch to this class. You guys have access to the live streams in 4 different locations, including the mobile app. You also have access to the recordings in those same locations, access to the handouts, the documents, the quizzes, the tests, and basically everything, including, assuming you pass based on our criteria here, which I'll go over here in a second, the actual FAA written test endorsement from our team of instructors at the end of the class. The only thing that we will do, just like I've always said, is no surprises here, is we will terminate the free access at the very, very end of the course, about 5 days after our last date of class. Our very, very last date of class should be May 20th, which is a Friday for this class. And just keep in mind that on that day, that's when the final exam becomes available. So you do need to watch all 12 of the lessons. Does not matter whether they are live or recorded. Does not matter whether you watch them on our website, on our mobile app, YouTube, or Facebook. Mix and match to your heart's content, whatever suits your personal schedule there. And then you just need to take that final exam with an 80% or higher. So we'll do our best to mimic the official exam to the best of our ability. And it's 60 questions, 2.5 hours. You have unlimited attempts to do it. And as I've always said, even if you are scoring an 80 or 90%, I would encourage you to keep taking it, because it's going to expose you to more FAA test questions and get you better prepared for the final, or the actual real life exam that is. In addition to that, 5 days later, which will put us on Wednesday, May 25th, for all the classes at 12 noon Pacific time, that is when we will officially close out the course. So just as a reminder there, that is when we remove the course offline in all those locations. The reason why we do it is it gives us that higher completion rate of 95%, which we're just shy of 96%. Like I said, I'm hoping everybody here pulls together, holding everybody's feet to the fire, getting it all done collectively as a group. And we can get that last little 0.1% that we're missing to call it 96, hopefully for the next course that we do in the near future here. For those that did participate in the lifetime access, as I said before, the 1 hour ground is still available, and Travis will basically put those into your account as soon as we close out the last remaining ones. So just stand by if you do need to utilize it. Just open up a help desk ticket and we will get you squared away, but hopefully we'll be able to do that hopefully early next week or midweek, and you'll be able to see those reflected in your account. For those that do have lifetime access, you can basically disregard the date on the screen there. Lifetime means lifetime. So if you need a longer period of time, or life, as we've always said, life challenges get in the way, that would be an opportunity for you to become basically a member with us. And it really helps us support our mission moving forward. The lifetime membership is still on sale for $171. It's marked off from $549, which is the original price. And you can even break it into 3 payments if you need something even more affordable. But That's still cheaper than an individual flight lesson with an airplane and an instructor. And not only does that give you access to this program, the Instrument Pilot Ground School, but it gives you access to all of our classes, the Private Pilot Ground School and the Oral Prep. If you guys need to go back and do any, you're working on a flight review or anything like that, it's a perfect opportunity. Your Commercial Pilot Ground School and the Part 107 drone class to fly drones commercially. It also gives you access to the ForeFlight course, the live weekly seminars and the Q&As, and from our wonderful team over here. You get a team of instructors that support you 24/7, answer your questions, and that is all included. So as I've always said, we're kind of unusual here in the sense that we are the only aviation ground school that teaches live. So what you guys see is we basically have classes that are offered to the public live, and we also do private classes for just our members every quarter as well. It's a little bit slower pace, and it's much smaller and more intimate, so we can actually answer all of your questions and give you guys a little bit more one-on-one attention. In addition to that, we do professionally record all of our courses offline, so they're done in the studio, and then instead of watching, as I've always said, 12 3.5-hour lessons, you guys can watch about 60 to 70 mini lessons throughout all those, and that's where we have about 800 plus videos and counting throughout all of our courses. So the other thing as well is that we've got about 6,500 FAA-like test questions within our database. So you guys have an opportunity to use the unlimited practice quizzes and exams for our course. And as you guys have noted, or probably noticed at this point, every time you guys take an exam, you'll get new test questions from the database. It's going to swap the potential answers and kind of jumble everything around, try to make you work a little bit harder and get you more prepared. Any of the courses that require an FAA written test endorsement, we do provide that, and also the FAA Wings credits. You guys also have access to all of our past webinars and the flight maneuvers lesson. As we always done in all of our classes, kind of as an incentive, is that the first 100 students will get a 1-hour ground instruction lesson for free. If you were to basically sit down with an instructor, whether it's for ground or flight, they will typically, at least in the LA area, charge about $80 an hour. So that is a freebie, and when I talked with Travis, there is still 47 remaining. So that is basically first come, first serve, and that does not expire, by the way. So if you want to use it or bank it for a later point in time, I would encourage you. Most people save them as they're preparing for their check rides and kind of moving forward with or towards their orals. And finally, awesome, Vlad. Glad to have your wife on board as well. And then finally, we also have our app. So there we have been growing the popularity of the app. And of course, we're also growing the functionality, the features of the app. Basically, every week we're making updates. And, we always find, because this is a recently, relatively new product for us with a mobile platform here, there's always little bugs and stuff that we're working out. So Travis is constantly, listening to your feedback and seeing how we can kind of make the app better and kind of expand on things. But it is available for both Apple and Android devices, for both tablets and mobile, or tablets and cell devices or cell phones. And you can find that app in the Google Play Store, the Apple stores, under Check Ride Prep, either all one word or Check Ride Space Prep, 2 words. And that will give you access to all of our courses, including this free instrument ground school. Remember that with the live program, you can't watch, unfortunately, the live streams on the mobile app. But you can watch the recordings. So once we're actually done with the live classes, we do post the recordings as well. And that also allows you to download those videos. So in the event you're potentially outside of a cell signal or Wi-Fi signal, you can actually continue your studies. In addition to that, it gives you access to obviously the handouts, the quizzes, the tests. You also have access to the help desk, the Ask a CFI, the discussion forums, all your documents that you need, the messaging functions, and more. So your progress is synced automatically to the website. So whatever you do on the mobile or whatever you do on the website will link up. And we are looking forward to adding more functionality as we progress with the program. So to date, I think we're the only one that has a fully functional app that does more than just an online portion where it's just the course, where it is truly, if you guys look at it and kind of explore it, there is kind of an entire community built in to it, just like on our website. All right, so that is about it. So let's move on to our instrument departures procedures. And like I said, what I'm going to do is the last thing that we did the other day was basically take a look at the slide and kind of review the 1, 2, 3 rule. I don't want to spend too much time reviewing it because where we actually left off was I showed you guys this chart. On the left-hand side, the flow chart basically, goes through, do you need to declare an alternate or do you not? And if you do, what's kind of the process in terms of what are the things you want to kind of consider, and what's the weather requirements at the end of the day. So what I want to jump to is right here, which is the actual scenario. So in this example here, I'm giving you guys an IFR flight, and it is based off of a tech route. So the tech route is a predetermined route because this is the Los Angeles area. And we basically have a little Cessna 152 764 Charlie Papa with a departure at Long Beach, California at 10 p.m. Pacific time. The destination will be Camarillo. So for those that are less familiar with the LA basin, Long Beach is right here, and Camarillo is over here on the top left. So our destination, we would anticipate based upon our flight planning that it would be about a 51-minute flight, so we should get in at 10:51 p.m. local time. Now the weather conditions at our estimated time of arrival are the following. We've got variable wind at 3 knots, 4 statute miles, few at 500, scattered at 1,000, broken at 2,500, overcast at 5,000, temperature 11, dew point 9, altimeter 2995. Now we are an IFR super equipped Cessna 152 here, and we are basically going to be our anticipated approach that we would like to use going into Camarillo is the RNAV GPS Zulu approach. The first question I have for you guys, taking a look at the weather, is do we need to file an alternate airport based upon the conditions above? And you guys can actually put, you can just write directly in the chat for this. What do you guys think? Yes or no? Do I need to file an alternate? And the flow chart should be in the last lesson. If it isn't, I can have Travis throw it in there. All right, we got a lot of no's there. So taking a look at this, if we look at the weather and kind of go back to the thinking about that 1, 2, 3 rule, we need to look at the weather conditions 1 hour before and 1 hour after our estimated departure or estimated time of arrival. We're going to assume that this TAF right here is including the 1 hour before and the 1 hour after. And the next thing we want to look at is basically the ceiling and the visibility. So if I go back to the 1, 2, 3 rule, which is right here, do we have a ceiling less than 2,000 feet or visibility less than 3 statute miles at our estimated time of arrival? And remember that if the answer is yes to that, then we do have to file an alternate. So the magic numbers are 2,000 feet and 3 statute miles. So let's go back to the scenario here. You'll notice that I'll go through the easy one here. We actually have 4 statute miles, so that's greater than the requirement, so that's not going to be an issue. And then remember, we are basically looking at, is there anything less than a 2,000 foot ceiling? And the ceiling is defined as the lowest of the broken or the overcast layer. So some students get this wrong because they assume that, hey, there's some type of clouds at 500 and 1,000 feet. And while that is true, there are clouds there. We do not care about few or scattered clouds, which don't necessarily make up or compose the overcast layer, or I'm sorry, the ceiling. The ceiling is only defined by the broken and overcast layer. And here we could see that we have a broken of 2,500, which is greater than the 2,000 foot requirement. So as most of you said there, it's going to be a no. It's not a requirement for this flight. Of course, I can't make it that easy. I wouldn't be a good instructor if I made it that easy. So very simply, if I told you that the broken was at 019, that's your new TAF. It just got amended. And as we can see there in this example, because it's below 2,000 feet with the TAF, then we would need an alternate. So if I'm looking around and I am realizing that, what are some potential airports that I could go to looking at this map here? So the green represents the coastline, so kind of gives you an idea. And I have a couple of, airports around Camarillo. First off, I've got Oxnard, which is actually the closest airport to Camarillo. And I also have Point Mugu. Now, Point Mugu is not going to be available to me. That's a naval air station, and that is just for a military use. So that's going to be kind of a no-go. So the closest available will be Oxnard. Now, one of the considerations that I'll kind of think about, though, is that if there is this low kind of ceiling that's kind of over Camarillo, you can clearly see that Camarillo is a little bit further, a couple miles further from the shoreline than Oxnard, which is literally sitting at the shoreline. So whatever conditions Camarillo is currently experiencing or is going to experience, most likely Oxnard is going to experience that or potentially worse conditions because they're closer to the shoreline. Okay. So for anybody here that is on the coastline, most folks are pretty familiar with coastal fog and kind of the marine layer. A lot of times what ends up happening is the marine layer comes in the early evening and it kind of persists until about 10 or 11 o'clock the next day where it burns off. So I could potentially look at Oxnard as that alternate, but I just kind of have to keep in mind that, the conditions are probably going to be nearly the same. Another idea that I could do is I could find an airport that is further inland, which probably will have better conditions. So I know based off of, locally flying in this area for a long period of time that the closer I actually get to the desert, which is all the way out here, like by Lancaster, the conditions are always going to be significantly better. So I could actually look at, potentially filing for Van Nuys. So the main criteria when you're selecting an alternate is you need to have a legal alternate. It does not mean that you have to fly to that alternate. You could fly wherever you want. I could actually file it if I'm able to. I could potentially file it for Oxnard, and even though I've got no real intentions of doing it, as long as I can figure out how to do that legally, I can use that. And if I can't get into Camarillo, I might just automatically want to go to Van Nuys because, hey, it has better weather conditions. So just because you file does not necessarily mean that you have to go to that alternate. Just think of that, number one. Number two, if I wanted to, because this is such a short flight, if the weather conditions were favorable in Long Beach, and maybe, for like planning purposes and logistic purposes, maybe I've got some friends down in Long Beach that I can spend the night versus, being stuck somewhere else in Los Angeles, I might just want to file back to Long Beach and just head over there and, call it a night. And if you've got some friends or family, then that's a perfect excuse to choose a location such as that. So those are all things you kind of want to think about. Sometimes what I think about is where did I park my car, and realistically, how long of an Uber ride do I want to get to my car from wherever I'm going to be landing. So the other thing you can also do is remember that you can choose any alternate you want as long as you can make it a legal alternate. And then secondly, remember that you need enough fuel to get to Camarillo in this case, and then to your alternate plus an additional 45 minutes. That's really the limiting factor here, especially in a 150. You only have a couple hours of fuel, just like most aircraft. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at, I want to look at Oxnard. Oxnard is the closest airport, but I need to basically kind of look at the actual, information and see if it's even possible. So a couple things before I do that. I just want to note my arrival time. I'm estimating this is a 51-minute flight, so I should be there about 10:51 p.m. So what I'm going to do, and remember, you have really two options of doing this. The way that the FAA recommends is basically pull up the approach plate, and it does not matter. You can choose any approach plate for that airport. The Oxnard airport actually has multiple different approaches. They have ILSs, GPS, and VOR approaches. So any one that you want. And really what you're going to do is we're basically going to see if there is this triangle with an A inside on the information section. If there is, then that's going to immediately tell you, hey, you got to basically figure out what are the alternate minimums for this airport. And to do that, you're going to go into your TPP and bring up my TPP here. Now, I did the work for you guys in the sense of it's already on the screen in front of you, but all you guys need to do is go into your actual TPP And then remember that when you guys are actually searching through your TPP, and you'd obviously want to use the corresponding one, this is for the Southwest, which is basically for Southern California. So that would include Camarillo and just those general areas. You can go through the table of contents, but these are usually going to be located somewhere towards the front of the actual book. And very simply, you're going to basically go past the takeoff minimums, and you'll find a section that has the alternate minimums. This is what we looked at before. These are going to be all the alternate minimums that actually apply for all the airports within this given area. So like I said, you could go directly to this, and if the airport's not listed, then you would use standard. What I'm going to do is these are listed alphabetically. Oxnard is all the way towards the end here. And what we'll see is we have Oxnard, California for Oxnard Airport, and then we have the following different approaches that are available to us. So you'll see that all of the approaches are NA. So it's not authorized when local weather is not available. So in the event that we saw a NOTAM where the ASOS or AWOS was potentially offline and we couldn't get the local weather, then very simply we could not file, we couldn't file Oxnard as my alternate airport. Then we have all these other different approaches. So the ILS or localizer is the best approach to get in to this airport specifically. And you're going to see that we actually have two notes. We have to look at note 1 and note 2. So note 1 is for the ILS, and all it's doing is basically changing the category D requirements, which remember, that is the aircraft speed that's for a very fast aircraft. We will be either an A or B. In that case, you need a 700-foot ceiling and 2 statute miles visibility. And really, this does not apply to us, so I would just ignore this. And number 2, it's not authorized or not available when the control tower is closed, okay? So if I go back to this, then what I would do is I would go through the Oxnard chart supplement, and inside the chart supplement, I'm actually going to go to the airspace hours of operation, and this is a Class Delta airport. And what we can see here is that the service hours are from 1500 to 0500 Zulu, and then at all other times it's Class Gulf airspace. So based upon that and my estimated time of arrival at 10:51 p.m., it's actually, the airport's going to be closed. It's going to revert back to Class Gulf airspace. And based upon that, I could not actually file this as a legal alternate because it doesn't meet the conditions. So I have two options. I can either select a different approach and base it off of that information, or I could go find a different airport. Now, the reason why you may want to not select a different approach is, let's say the weather is just really crappy conditions, and really, the only way that'll get you in is the ILS, because it will get you the lowest or closest to the ground. So you may not want to risk it with any other approach, but you do have the other opportunities. Some of you may not be GPS equipped, so that may rule out this one and this one. The VOR, if we were to actually look up this VOR approach, you'll realize that the minimums for this approach are 500 feet. So you need to be able to see the runway at roughly about 500 feet above the ground. So if the conditions are maybe a 400-foot ceiling at Oxnard, then it wouldn't even be worth it to attempt to get in, because of you may not even be able to get into the airport, period. The other things as well is always double check your NOTAMs. So this was a NOTAM that was pulled for Oxnard as well. And while you're going through this process, make sure that there's no changes. One of the big changes here for the straight-in ILS is they actually increased the ILS height. So once again, if you were hoping to get down to 200 feet above the ground, you're actually going to be quite a bit higher in this case, just because of this amendment listed. So now what I've got to do is I've got to kind of figure out what would be my next plan. So if I can't necessarily file, Oxnard as my legal alternate, I can go kind of back to my map and kind of think about, well, where else could I potentially go? So for general aviation aircraft, I would probably go to Van Nuys. It's further inland. They have 2 parallel runways. They have a lot of services, a lot of different FBOs that I can use, and it's only going to be about a 30-40 minute drive back to the Camarillo area. So those are all considerations. The other thing too is, like I said, I can choose any airport that I want. And because this is a fictional flight, I want to fly in where the big boys fly. And I am going to say that I want to check out Los Angeles International. I think it'd be really cool to fly in there. It's about 11 o'clock at night. And I think, yeah, why not? I'll pay the $100 landing fee. So the next thing that I'm going to do is, now that I've kind of have my next target of LAX, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out any approach going into Los Angeles International. And as you guys know, at these very, very large airports here, there are about a gazillion different approaches. So very simply, if I were to look up all the different approaches, all of these are different approach plates. All of these right here. Does not matter which one you choose. You can pick up any one that you want randomly. So just kind of see what are going to be the requirements or anything else. Now, the most common one that you will typically utilize going into Los Angeles International is going to be the ILS localizer runway 24 right, which is actually on the north complex of the airport. So by looking at this, if I want to use LAX, you're going to see that there is no triangle with an A in it. So that means that there's no alternate minimums that exist for this specific airport. So all I'm going to do now is figure out what are the standard alternate minimums. And, you know, I would anticipate flying in on an ILS. So I'm not going to worry about a non-precision approach, which they don't really have any except for the GPSs. So what I'm going to have to basically determine is I need a 600-foot ceiling and 2 statute miles of visibility. So I pull up your TAF for LAX, and I know that this is basically going to be another 30 minutes in addition to my flight time. So what would end up happening is I would try to pull the TAF as close to my anticipated arrival. So if I know I'm going to be getting into Camarillo at 10:51 p.m., and then I'm going to need to fly to my alternate LAX, which might be 30 minutes, let's call it 30 minutes of flight time, then my estimated time of arrival at LAX would be approximately, what is that, 11:21 p.m. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to look at the TAF for around 11:21 p.m. or whatever the closest TAF that's available for that time is. Okay, so when I do that and I pull up the TAF, this is the information that I get. And it says variable at 3 knots, 7 statute miles of visibility. Scattered at 1,000, broken at 4,500, and overcast at 5,000. So the weather conditions are actually a little bit better. And we actually have a high ceiling. They're all above 4,500 feet. So in this case, I just make sure that at LAX, at the approximate time of arrival, I have at least a 600-foot ceiling and 2 statute miles. And we can clearly see I've got 7 statute miles. That's more than enough. And I have a 4,500-foot ceiling, which is more than enough for the 600-foot ceiling. The next step is all I'm going to do is basically list my alternate. So I'll put KLAX in the alternate form, which is obviously going to be online or digital. I'll file that away, and that is going to be the game plan moving forward. Now, at the end of the day, the computer system is not smart enough to tell you if you're right or wrong. So what people kind of get into, or you could actually get a violation or kind of fall into the trap of, you could select an airport that is not legal. And of course, just like anything else, the FAA is never going to know unless you get into some type of incident or accident. And then when they find out that it's not legal, then you could have a violation. So anytime you submit a alternate, just remember that the computer doesn't check this information. It's going to accept anything you put in there. Okay. Your job as the PIC is to make sure that you have a legal alternate in these types of circumstances. Now, going back to my map here, if we filed LAX as the alternate, it doesn't mean I have to fly there. It just means that I found an airport, I did my planning, I've got a legal alternate. If I want to fly into and execute the approach going into Oxnard 10 times, I can. If I want to fly over to Van Nuys, Burbank, Whiteman, if I want to fly over to El Monte, any of these airports I can fly to. And the point is that you never, ever, ever have to go to your alternate. You're not committing in stone that you're going to your alternate. That's just, you got to at least plan for it so, you know, you've got something to do or somewhere to go or something to list. All right. So any questions kind of with that scenario? Did that kind of, you know, resolve any questions that you had when we initially went over it? And like I said, we will put that little cheat sheet of the flow chart. I will make sure that Travis has that available in the last lesson because it corresponds with the departures. So You can call to get alternate weather. Yeah, absolutely. Does ForeFlight figure this out for you? No. So all your electronic flight bags out there, it makes this work a lot easier in the sense that you have weather at your fingertips. You can pull up approach plates and do all this stuff kind of fairly rapidly. But there's no function in ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot or any other product where you can say, what are my options for legal alternates based upon the time and the weather conditions? You still have to go through the process and do a little bit of your homework and research to kind of figure out what's going to work for you. Right? All right, so let's look at another FAA test question here, or your first FAA test question of the night. Let me go ahead and pull this up. So for an aircraft other than helicopters, what minimum weather conditions must be forecast for your ETA at an alternate airport that is a precision approach procedure with standard alternate minimums in order to list it as an alternate for the IFR flight? So you've got your three values there. Just figure out which one is closest. Remember to please answer in the poll. Sorry about that. I'm trying to pull up your next approach here. Plenty of, yeah, if you're a software engineer, plenty of opportunities in the aviation. I just don't know how profitable it is. The other one that people want, actually one that I've wanted us is, or for our students is, if someone could create a system that randomly pulls TAF and METARs, and I don't think that part's hard, but second part would be allowing a student to either figure it out, like how to code it, and then basically have a decode button. Doesn't seem very hard though. I got about half the class in so far. For the person that's looking for all the digital TPPs, give me one sec. I got the website copied over here. So this is where you can find all your digital TPPs, and then obviously they're going to be listed based upon your region. If you're unfamiliar with your region, you might have to click on a few different ones to see which ones the map or the section or the TPP actually covers. All right, about 80% now. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this one. Got about 66% of the class with A, 28% with B, and the balance of the class with C. So this is a pretty simple question, actually, when we think about it. We just have to look at what are the key components here. And basically, what minimum weather conditions must be forecast for your ETA at the alternate airport. And the components that we have is this is a precision approach with standard alternate minimums. So this is basically your standard numbers. And very simply, remember that the values are either going to be a non-precision approach or a precision approach. So a non-precision approach is an 800-foot ceiling and 2 statute miles. A precision approach is 600-foot ceiling and 2 statute miles. So with this, all we need in this circumstance with the majority of the class with the correct answer will be A, which is a 600-foot ceiling and 2 statute miles visibility at your estimated time of arrival. It doesn't include an hour before, hour after, anything like that. We only look at that for, determining whether you actually need a alternate or not, okay? If we basically changed this and we basically said it was a non-precision approach, then obviously answer C would be correct because that's an 800-foot ceiling and 2 statute miles. So you'll see those two different variations of this test question moving forward. All right, got one more test question for you. And also remember that just completely ignore the helicopter stuff. Sometimes when people see helicopters, they get thrown off. Just don't worry about that. All right, so here is an example where you guys will basically be provided a specific TAF for Atlanta, and you have a proposed ETA of 1930 Zulu. So basically, you just need to determine, is an alternate airport required under these conditions? Sorry about that. Of course, this is going to test your knowledge on making sure that you guys still remember how to read these things. Yeah, the 12, 18, 18 is correct. At about half the class in. All right, so I will keep it open while we go through this real quick here, but very simply, remember that we are looking for 1 hour before and 1 hour after our estimated time of arrival. So in our example, we have an ETA of 1930 Zulu. So really the time frame that I'm looking for is going to be from 1830 Zulu to about 2030 Zulu. So that is the hour before and the hour after my estimated time of arrival. And then what I need to do is I need to make sure that the conditions are better than, greater than 2,000 foot ceiling and 3 statute miles. And if they are, then we don't need an alternate. If they aren't, meaning that they're worse than that, then we will need to file one. So this is the TAF for Atlanta. It came out on the 12th day at 1720 Zulu, and it's basically valid. They're doing this a weird way. The 12th day from 1800 to 1800, okay? So the first part of it, which is actually going to cover our 1830 time frame. So this started at 1800, so we definitely care about the first line. Is we have wind of 200 at 12 knots, 5 statute miles, so that is better than 3 statute miles. Haze and broken at 3,000. So far, these numbers, the ceiling and visibility during that time frame are greater than the requirements. Then, starting at 2,000 or 2,000 from 2,000, which does fall in line between 1930 and 2030, we have 3 statute miles visibility, which is right at the minimum there, but still good to go. We got the thunderstorm or thunder showers with rain, and then we have overcast at 2,500 with cumulonimbus clouds. So based upon that, that is still greater than 2,000 feet as well for the ceiling. And if we look at the next line, we've got from 2,200, and keep in mind, 2,200 is way down here. So that's kind of outside of the window. So really these last 2 lines, we don't need to actually take into consideration any of the conditions that are occurring because they fall outside of that 1 hour before and after. So in this case, because the ceiling and visibility is greater than at least 3 statute miles or greater, and we have a ceiling of at least 2,000 feet or greater, then we are not required to have any type of alternate. So the correct answer here, kind of looking at it, we had about 51% of the class with the correct answer. We got 23% with B and 25%-ish with C. So the correct answer is no. And this is because the ceiling and visibility are forecast to be at or above 2,000 feet and 3 miles within 1 hour before and 1 hour after the estimated time of arrival. Okay, so yeah, I mean, does anyone want to fly into a thunderstorm? Probably not. But this is good practice in the airlines, still in the airlines today. This is how we get them. They're not actually decoded for us, and it's the job of the pilots, both first officer and the captain, basically run through this and make sure that, hey, did dispatch, file everything correctly? Do we need an alternate, or is the weather conditions maybe deteriorating? And a lot of times the dispatchers for the airlines will typically, file their flight plans and basically get all the paperwork done a couple hours ahead of time sometimes. And if you are in a very dynamic weather situation, the captain may realize, oh my goodness, like the weather is deteriorated. Now all of a sudden, instead of the 2,500 foot ceiling, now we're dealing with 1,000 foot ceiling. So let me go call the dispatcher back and actually tell them that we're going to need some type of alternate. So those are the things that we want to think about, and you'll see that these are going to be more practical questions moving forward. All right, the next one that we want to look at is going to be your takeoff minimums. And once again, just as a brief refresher, you are not required under Part 91 to, have any takeoff minimums. You could do what we call 0-0, which is the equivalent of sticking your hand out in front of you, and it would be so foggy and dense that you wouldn't be able to see your hand a foot in front of your face. Now, all of the takeoff minimums are going to be based off of the TERPS guidance of 200 feet per nautical mile that we discussed the other day. And if they're any greater than that, they will have to be listed in the book. Now, the people who do participate in these are pretty much all of the Part 121, 25, 29, and 135 operations. And what they have to do is basically a two-step process. So number one, they have to figure out whatever their departure airport is. So when they figure out what the departure airport is, then they can look up the takeoff information. And if the airport has, takeoff minimums listed, you have to go by those values first. But if the airport does not have any takeoff minimums, then we use the standard numbers that you guys see in the chart on the lower page. So if there are no, alternate takeoff minimums, then very simply, it's going to be based on the number of engines. So if you look at maybe this Airbus, I think, in the image, we can see that it has 2 engines. So the requirement here is 1 statute mile of visibility. If you got 3 or more engines, then you're only required to have half a statute mile of visibility. Now, once again, remember that it's your job as PIC and your responsibility to determine, the safe operation. And couple things to kind of think about are, if commercial pilots who are flying passengers on a daily basis must comply with the takeoff minimums, then it's probably good judgment and common sense that should tell you that you should also abide by them as well. It's not a legal requirement, but highly suggestible. And I would encourage you mentioning that during your check ride as well, during your oral, show the examiner that, you're thinking about safety beyond just whatever the minimums are. Also, if you were to take off from a 0-0 condition, a couple things to think about. If it's truly that bad, I don't know how you would taxi to the runway. If you can't see a foot in front of you, you're probably not going to be able to make it to the runway. And even if you could make it to the runway, the problem with that is that if you were able to get off into the air and you had any type of engine or any type of systems issues and you needed to return back to the airport, there's no approach that allows you to go in 0-0. It's just not a reality. You'd have to go find a different airport, and it becomes very, very difficult. Okay, so you guys have all graduated now. You guys are all commercial pilots flying for a Part 135 operation out of Burbank, California, which is a Class Charlie airport. And you guys are flying this beautiful Pilatus PC-12, a $2 million plane. And these are going to be the conditions for your scenario. So you guys hop on to the Burbank ATIS, and this is what you hear. Burbank information alpha, time 2053 Zulu, wind 160 at 12, gusting to 20, 1 statute mile, overcast 4,000, temperature 18, dew point 17, altimeter 2998. Remark, sea level pressure 160. Then we've got our runway 15 in use, landing and departing. Read back all hold short instructions and advise you have information alpha. Okay, so you listen to that, you jot that all down, and now the main thing that we're looking for in the ATIS that I'm kind of cheating with is that we have a runway in use. So I could basically utilize that information for planning purposes. Now, in the event you didn't have a runway in use, then very simply what you'd have to do is probably call up clearance delivery and pick up your actual clearance. And then with clearance delivery, they'll actually let you know what runway to anticipate. So the next step is because I'm in this 135 charter operation, I need to look up Burbank. And the way that I do this is the exact same way that we did it previously, but we just go to a different section of the TPP. So earlier we were in the Southwest TPP and we were looking at Oxnard, California, and it has the alternate minimums. If I basically scroll up a little bit, we'll get to the section that has the T's in them. And this is all alphabetical. So we know Burbank is towards the top of this listing. So I'm going to kind of go up quite a bit here. And let's see, we got Chino, Carlsbad, and Camarillo. So we're a little bit before that. Here's Burbank. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically take a look at this section in green, and it says takeoff minimums and obstacle departure procedures. Now, the only thing that applies to us in our scenario is going to be the takeoff minimums. All the other stuff we're going to talk about later, and a little bit actually later today after the break. So I would actually want to figure out what is the runway that's assigned to me, or what would I be expecting? And if you're not sure, maybe you could be expecting two different runways. You'd want to make sure that you have the capability of meeting the criteria for both of those runways. And maybe for whatever reason, you can't, accept runway 8 with a 410-foot climb per nautical mile. Maybe you could accept runway 15, which is only 335 feet instead. And if that's the case, it would be worthwhile noting or letting the controller know, so maybe they could adjust it for you. So I would look at this information, figure out whatever runway I've got, and here we've printed it out for you guys. And very simply, we've got runway 15. And what it says here is it says you can use the standard numbers, and the standard numbers are here, with a minimum climb of 335 feet per nautical mile to 5,000 feet. So as you guys can see, pretty simple. We only have one engine here, so we're going to fall under this first line. And we're going to need to make sure that we have at least 1 statute mile of visibility. So with that, that's kind of step number 1. And I'm going to go back to the current ATIS information, and we're right on the dot. We're right on the edge. The requirement is 1 statute mile, and ATIS is currently advising that it's 1 statute mile as well. So we're still good. The next step that I want to do is, can this aircraft actually make that climb gradient? Okay. And we have a climb gradient of 335 feet per nautical mile to 5,000 feet. And the way that we do this is we use a climb and descent table. So that will actually look like this. So the climb and descent tables are actually found in the TPP. It's the very, very last inside page of the TPP. So that's the reason why you want to have it available to or bookmark it. And anytime that a climb gradient is required for a departure, then you need to make sure that the aircraft has the performance to actually execute what is required. If the aircraft cannot deliver on those requirements, then very simply, you can't, you either have to call off the flight, or you potentially have to figure out a different solution to get out of the airport. Okay. It's always important to calculate your aircraft performance, particularly when we're flying out of airports at higher altitudes on warmer days, because remember, we got density altitude issues. And then minimum departure climbs are based off of that TERPS guidance of 200 feet per nautical mile. So it's a pretty simple table, and we're going to use this a few different times to kind of get your hands on it. But this is what the table looks like, and this is kind of the zoomed in portion. So we're going to go back to the requirements of 335 feet per nautical mile. And what I'm going to do is I will actually look at this column right here, which is the feet per nautical mile. And we don't exactly have 335, so I am actually going to err on the side of caution and do something a little bit higher, a little bit more conservative. And then what I need to do is, we're professional pilots. When we went through our systems training, we were taught in the Pilatus that our VX speed was 120 knots. And Our captains today, which is us, we have basically calculated an estimated ground speed of 120 knots because the winds aloft are basically nil, okay? So everything is based off of your ground speed, so keep that in mind. It's not based off of your indicated airspeed, your true airspeed. It's based off of your estimated ground speed. This top line right here is your ground speed, and I'm basically going to find whatever is the closest value, so 120 knots in this case. Very simply, I'm basically going to go down to where these two values meet. And what 680 is telling me is the fact that 335 feet per nautical mile is the equivalent of 680 feet per minute. Okay, so for most of us, that's reasonable. In a Cessna or a Piper or anything else, the only thing I would make sure of is keep in mind that your performance degrades as you climb up in altitude, right? So if you're maybe, getting this type of procedure, in a aircraft that's less powerful than a Pilatus, you might actually have trouble executing it. So with the Pilatus, though, we have no problem. We can easily climb at 2,000 feet per minute up to 15,000. So in this case, we can meet the criteria. We have the standard value of 1 statute mile, which is the minimum for the standard single engine or 1 to 2 engines, and the ATIS is still reporting the fact that we got 1 statute mile as well. So right on the edge. The other time that we're also going to use this is we will also look at this when we get to the approach phase. And very simply, you primarily use the degrees for your actual approaches. And what you'll usually find is that from the final approach fix down to whatever the runway is, they will typically tell you that, whatever the actual angle is, okay? And the reason why that's helpful is, let's say that we were in a Cessna and we knew that from the final approach fix all the way down the runway, it's a 3-degree glide slope. Well, very simply, I would figure out where 3 degrees is, and you'll notice I'm not using feet per nautical mile. I'm using the degrees, and then I would figure out my estimated ground speed. So I'm in a category A aircraft. I'm hoping my ground speed would be 90. And very simply, I'm just going to go where these two values meet. And what that would tell me is that once I get past the final approach fix, in order to effectively keep the glide slope perfectly centered in the donut, I just need to descend at 478 feet per minute all the way down to the runway or to my, wherever my missed approach point is. So you can also utilize that as well, and this information is available. It's just an extra step. Now, the cool thing with the Jeppesen charts, though, is that they actually give you the descent rates. They give it to you in terms of, besides just how many degrees it is, they also give you the information of how many feet per minute are going to be required as well. So as you guys can see, that is how we are able to compute our climb and descent rates. It's also how we're able to ensure that if it does apply to us, can we accept the actual takeoff minimums or not, or takeoff requirements. And once again, it always behooves you to do what the pros are doing if you can. All right. So with that, we are at the top of the hour here, maybe a minute over. So let's go ahead and take that break. When we come back from the break, we'll go ahead and move on to our departure procedures and fly through those. And then we'll start taking a look at the very last third of the class. We'll take a look at the en route procedures as well. Go ahead and stretch your legs, grab something to drink, recaffeinate, rebourbonate, rebeerinate, whatever your beverage choice is out there. And we'll see everybody back in 10. Everybody, welcome back from break. And we're going to push on with our departure procedures. So there are several different types of departure procedures that we're going to cover, and we'll cover them in greater detail within this next segment here. So instrument departure procedures are actually pre-planned IFR procedures that provide obstacle clearance from the terminal area to the appropriate en route structure. Ideally, the instruments, basically the air traffic controllers, are trying to do their best to manage as many aircraft as possible and do it as efficiently as possible as well. So that's really the main purpose for most of these procedures out there, where we will usually see procedures that get you from the terminal airport, which is basically the airport environment that you start off with, to your en route environment, which is pretty much your straight and level section of the flight. And then we kind of reverse that to get you into an arrival, which leads to an approach that we'll talk about later down the road. Now, there are two different types of departure procedures, or what we call DPs for short. We have obstacle departure procedures, ODPs, and standard instrument departures, which are called SIDs. Now, the ODPs are far greater in number, and they're probably going to be something that you will encounter far more than SIDs. And we'll go into kind of the differences here. But one of the largest differences that we can see is that the ODP, for example, Montgomery Gibbs down in San Diego, this is a departure procedure, and they're usually all pretty much textual based. So that's the reason why it's very important for you guys to understand, how to actually operate using a departure procedure. The other ones, which are SIDs, are going to be both textual and also kind of have a visual representation of how you're supposed to actually fly. And they're a little bit easier, but the main thing is that with the SIDs, there are a lot of SIDs out there that are designed to get you to the flight levels. So for the majority of us, they may be off limits. So the first one we're going to look at is going to be the ODP, which is the simpler of the two. And the term ODP is used to define the procedures that simply provide obstacle clearance. So obstacle departure procedures are only used for obstruction clearance and do not include ATC-related climb requirements. So an ODP must be developed when obstructions penetrate the 40-to-1 departure obstacle area. So basically the 40-to-1 rule is something that you can find within the TERPs, and it's not something you necessarily have to memorize, because the ODPs just at least have to, if there is an obstacle within that climb gradient of the 40-to-1 departure area, then they basically need some type of departure procedure or an ODP that needs to be developed for that specific airport. Now, obstacle departure procedures are not assigned by ATC unless absolutely necessary to achieve aircraft separation. So not something that you may see every single day, but I can kind of give you an example. If we're going to be flying out of a towered airport at Camarillo, anytime that the tower is in operation, you never get an ODP. So it's like the rarest thing in the world. Now, if the tower is closed and approach control is closed, and the only folks that are open at midnight are LA Center, 100% of the time, if you take off from Camarillo, you will get the ODP, because LA Center radar does not pick us up until we're about 4,000 feet. So the reason why they would assign an ODP for an aircraft is that, they can't provide any obstacle protection for you. And if you can't do it visually, then you need some type of procedure that's going to help you out until you are in underneath their radar. They can actually see you. At the end of the day, it's the pilot's responsibility to determine if there is an ODP published for that airport. And if a Part 91 pilot is not given a clearance containing an ODP, SID, or radar vectors, and an ODP exists, compliance with such a procedure is the pilot's choice. So if you are not assigned any of those following and you want to basically fly an ODP, you're more than welcome to. Just always make sure that, you consider, kind of do your pre-planning ahead of time, and we'll talk about the reasons why here in a minute. Now, your obligations as PIC during these departure procedures as follows. So, pilot of an IFR aircraft operating from locations where departure procedures are effective may expect an ATC clearance containing a departure procedure, whether that be a SID or the actual ODP. Now, the use of the departure procedure requires pilot possession of at least a textual description of the approved departure procedure. And if a pilot does not possess a pre-printed departure procedure, or for any other reason does not wish to use a departure procedure, and he or she is expected to advise ATC. Now, you can also do this when you're filing your flight plan in the remarks section. You could be super boring, and honestly, you'll piss off ATC. And you could basically say no departure procedures, which is including SIDS, ODPs, or STARS, okay, which are the arrivals. So we'll talk about STARS next week, but STARS are basically the opposite of your departure procedures, and in the sense that they're taking you from the en route environment down to the ground. So the reason why you would piss off ATC with this is that they're going to have to work extra hard to get you in or out of an airport because you don't want to participate. So you're probably gonna ruffle some feathers. Now, if you accept the departure procedure, or if a departure procedure is accepted in the clearance, then the pilot must comply with it. So make sure that when you get your clearance information and you're picking it up from clearance delivery or from ground, wherever you're doing it, make sure that you understand what the clearance is telling you and make sure that the aircraft is capable. So, you don't want to get into a situation where, you take off and then you realize that, hey, my aircraft can't comply with the departure procedure. I didn't read it fully, and there's a speed limit, right? The speed limit is 250 knots and I'm flying a 172, and no one told me about the speed limit. It's your responsibility to read over all the information that pertains to the departure procedure and make sure that you can comply with it, and also make sure that you understand it. And I'll show you the reason why here in a second. So let's look at the one at Camarillo. And very simply, in the event you wanted to execute the obstacle departure procedure, maybe it's midnight and we have the tower, which is closed. We have the TRACON, the Point Mugu approach, which is closed. And the only folks that are left to really handle IFR requests are going to be Los Angeles Center. And just out of personal experience, I know that LA Center typically cannot see a Cessna below about 4,000 feet. So it's going to be very difficult for them to ensure obstacle clearance up to that altitude. So what they're going to do is they will 100% of the time at this airport assign an ODP. So going back to the ODP, the AIM is going to define the pilot responsibility regarding the ODP. So you guys can always take a look at that in Chapter 5. And then pilots are directed to consider terrain in the vicinity of the airport. And if an ODP is available, determine if it should be flown or if a visual obstacle avoidance is possible. Okay, so if it's nighttime, you may not be able to visually see the terrain that surrounds you. A good example of this is also adding additional tools to your toolkit at the end of the day. There's been plenty of times I've gone to remote airports in, where was it? It was like western Texas on my way to, was it El Paso, I think? And, 11 o'clock at night, I think we landed at this one airport in Texas and we're surrounded literally by these hills that we can't see. It's kind of difficult to determine how high they are. And if you look at the VFR chart, all you see is like obstacle of literally all of these different flashing lights that we could see at the top of the towers. But it was very, very difficult to determine what's the safest way to get the heck off the ground and make sure that we don't hit these. And the simple solution to that was the airport actually had an ODP. So as long as we comply with that ODP, the textual form, and you can do this as a VFR pilot, I would encourage you guys, if you're going out of an airport and you've never been there and it's pitch dark and you don't know the obstacles around you, look up the ODP, fly the ODP in a VFR way, and you'll be guaranteed not to actually hit anything. So it's another thing you can kind of rely upon. Now, the ODPs may be flown without ATC clearance unless an alternate departure procedure or radar vectors have been specifically assigned to you. And then in all cases, the obstacle clearance is not provided by ATC until the controller begins to provide navigational guidance in the form of radar vectors. So they're usually going to be depicted in a textual, not a graphic format. There's a couple of ODPs out there that actually are graphical. They're few and far between. And they're going to be located in front of the NACO chart book, which now we actually call, I need to update that. We now call this, let's just think of it as the TPP, okay? So this is in that same section that we looked at the takeoff minimum requirement here. So if we look at this, we have Camarillo, California, and where I would find this information is located right here, which is the departure procedure. And very simply, I can then read out, depending on which runway I'm going to be departing from. In our case, I might probably be departing from runway 26. So I'm going to climb to 2,500 feet on the Camarillo VOR, radial 265, and thence climbing left turn direct to Camarillo VOR before proceeding on course. Okay, so some of them are pretty easy, but I would caution you, some of them are a bit trickier. Now, the other thing I'll also kind of point out is going to be the differences between our NACO charts, which are the government ones that we've been using, and our friends over at Jeppesen. Okay, so the Jeppesen charts are 1,000% better. They are more expensive. If you guys have ForeFlight, they're like $200 or $199 a year. It's definitely not a requirement. It's more of a luxury. But once you kind of start using them, and pretty much most of the airlines use them, they are, worth it at the end of the day. The nice thing about Jeppesen, just kind of comparing and contrasting the differences here. Once again, you guys will not have Jeppesen anywhere on your written. And then basically once you guys finish up with your written, then, it's your prerogative if you want to switch to a different product. So your check ride examiner could care less if you're, executing your approaches with a Jeppesen chart, or if you're going to execute them with a, the standard government charts. So the cool thing is if we look at this, they basically give you a lot more information on a single sheet of paper. So if I look up this airport, this is the Salem Airport over in Oregon. We can see the airport diagram at the top. We have all of the pertinent runway information, which is basically listed within this section right here. So this is basically the same thing that I would need to look up if I had the chart supplement with me. The next section that we have here, this is your takeoff and obstacle departure procedures. So basically all of this. And the really nice thing about it is it does all the math for you. So it tells you what the climb gradients are. It tells you which runway you need to look at. It also tells you if there's inoperative equipment, it calculates the exact values that you need. In this section down here, that is right here, which is the obstacle departure. So it gives you the obstacle departure information right here for this airport for all the runways. And it also tells you, hey, if you want to use this airport as an alternate, here's all the alternate information. And it will also tell you the alternate requirements actually based upon your aircraft speed, what are the minimums, and then if there's any special things you need to note. So right here, it says that you can only use this airport or the following approaches authorized only when local weather is available. And then all I would do is I would look down at the category A and B here. And for every single approach, I would see that I need an 800-foot ceiling and 2 statute miles. So very simply, it makes your job as a pilot a lot easier. It gives you all the information and research that you have or really need to do on a single page. If we were to try to find all this information elsewhere, I would have to go into several different documents, right? So this would basically be from your chart supplement. This over here is also from your chart supplement. This over here is from your TPP, but it's going to be that the takeoffs portion of it. Okay. The obstacle departure procedure will be the takeoff portion as well, and then your alternates will also be the TPP, but that is basically the alternate section of it. So you're effectively looking at 3 different documents to find the exact same information that's consolidated on a single page. So that's the reason why in some ways this stuff is a little bit easier. Okay. All right, let's look at our examples. So what I want you guys to do is take out a piece of paper, and very simply, we are going to be doing a cross-country flight from Montgomery, Gibbs Executive, which is down in the San Diego area, and we're going all the way back up to Camarillo. And for those that are not familiar with Southern California, down here is San Diego. So this is MYF, and it's actually starting right there. And I've drawn the route for you just to kind of give you guys an idea of where Camarillo is, which is actually off the map. It's actually over here. And very simply, you guys will also notice that I have the pink line has about the direction that you are departing from the VOR, which is about 310 degrees. And we go all the way up here to this airport. We basically make a left-hand turn to 272, and we continue up to Camarillo. So you guys have a general idea. Now, the route that is advised when we pick up the clearance is as follows. They're basically letting us know that we are to expect runway 28 left is what they want us to depart on. And very simply, we are going to be cleared over to Camarillo. Our routing is really just a tech route, which is from the airport to Mission Bay VOR, then to Seal Beach VOR, the Popper intersection, Santa Monica VOR, Van Nuys VOR, and then off to Camarillo. And our assigned altitude at this case will be 6,000 feet. So the next thing that we need to do is that because we've been assigned the ODP, we need to make sure that, hey, do we actually understand the instructions here, and can we actually execute this? So I've underlined in red what the expectations are, and we are going to be taking off from 28 left, and we know that our general direction is about 310 degrees based upon our routing. So let's look at a little bit of a zoomed in version here. And once again, we're basing it off of this. So here is Montgomery, which is located right here. And for those that need it, this is the Mission Bay VORTAC. So the instructions are as follows. It says climbing left turn, all aircraft climb direct to MZB VORTAC. So the Mission Bay VORTAC is this one, and that is listed right here. Okay. What I want you guys to do is take a minute and draw this on a piece of paper. Doesn't have to be very pretty. If it was me, I basically draw it like this, and here is the VOR, and then just figure out how am I supposed to, navigate and then, proceed on my own path. All right. So I will give you guys about 2.5 minutes on this and see if you guys can figure this out. All right, got about 2 minutes left. Got about 1.5 minutes. Great, guys, got a little bit less than a minute. Anyone stuck yet, or have you guys and gals all been able to draw the solution? All right, does everybody have their drawing done? Anyone needs the route? I'll go back one page. That is the route. The initial heading out of the route was 310 off. The reason why I give you guys this, of course, is I made this error. A friend of mine and myself, we went down to Montgomery and went to the restaurant there pretty late at night, and I think it was right around closing time. And of course, the tower was closed, and you got to pick up your approach from basically SoCal Approach. And once again, from SoCal Approach, they assign us this ODP, and I think both of us heard or scratching our head. But in addition to that, after assigning us the entire clearance with the ODP, they give us a void time of something like 3 minutes. So we've never seen this ODP, did not know how to fly this ODP, and we had less than 3 minutes at this point to load up everything else that they gave us and get wheels up before we missed the void time. So this is kind of an example of making sure that you understand what is being asked of you, because most people actually get this one wrong. And I remember what our initial thinking was when we saw this. So very simply, it says climbing left turn. That's pretty easy. All aircraft climb direct to the mission bay VORTAC. I think we can handle that one. Aircraft departing the mission bay VORTAC, radial 90090 to clockwise radial 360, climb on course. All others climb in the mission bay holding pattern, hold west right turns 075 inbound, across the mission bay VORTAC at or above 2,300 feet. So in this case, we knew that we were not doing that last portion. We didn't have to do a hold, and we weren't basically heading in that direction. But what we initially thought when we were drawing this on our iPads was this. So for those that are less familiar with this area, the runways are basically aligned like this, and we know that the mission bay VOR VORTAC is here. So pretty simple. We make the left-hand turn. We're then basically going to proceed direct to the VOR VORTAC. And the part that got us confused is this part, radial 090, clockwise radial 360. So what we thought was that, hey, this is radial 090, and we know that this is radial 360 up here. We honestly thought that you had to basically do like an arc around it and start on the 090, continue flying in this direction till you get to 360, and then you could basically proceed on course. Okay. Now, lucky for us, and that is an incorrect answer. So if anybody got that, you're not alone. I made that mistake a long time ago, and lucky for us, right as we were about approaching that 090 degree radial, the controller saved our lives and saved our tickets and said, Cessna, blah, 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 proceed on course. We made a right-hand turn and we were heading northbound towards Camarillo, and we didn't have to go through that mess. So what this is actually saying at the end of the day is not that, but basically it's saying that aircraft departing mission bay VORTAC between radial 090 clockwise to radial 360, what you're supposed to do is climb on course. So remember that these are all based off of magnetic directions. We have 076, and we also have the markers for 090 here. So very simply, effectively what they're doing is we have, this is the 090 degree radial. And of course, going northbound, this is, I'll draw that a little higher so we can see it. This is the 360 degree radial. And what they're basically saying to you is that the first part is make a left turn and then proceed direct to the VOR. So we would do that. If you are going to be, if your course is anywhere between 090 and 360, once you get to the VOR, you proceed on course. So we know that the outbound course for us in this circumstance was approximately 310 degrees based upon what we filed on our flight plan. So this would basically be the 310 degree radial, which would basically put us kind of northwest bound towards Camarillo. So if you were departing anywhere between the 090 and 360 degree radial, that is when you proceed on course. All others climb in mission bay holding VORTAC or holding pattern, hold west right turns, etc., etc. So effectively what they're saying is that if you are departing between 360 degrees and 090, anywhere kind of in this realm over here, that is when you will actually have to do that bottom portion here, where you need to basically, climb in a holding pattern until you're at or above 2,300 feet. Once you're at or above 2,300 feet, then you can actually proceed on course yourself, okay? And it makes sense. If we were to kind of look at this and, look at kind of the topography of the area, And also, you know, if anyone is less familiar with San Diego, over in this general area, this is actually where all of those mountains are, which are basically to the kind of the northeast of the airport. So they're giving you an opportunity to at least start your climb in lower elevation before you actually proceed in this general direction. While the rest of it, really everything else is fairly flat because it's leading out to the ocean. And that's really all it's saying. So how many people actually got that? How many people got it correctly? Jeff was asking, do you fly over Mission Bay or turn early to intercept the 310 degree radial? You actually fly direct to Mission Bay. It's telling you aircraft departing Mission Bay, right? So you need to proceed direct to the VOR. You're going to fly over the VOR. You'll go from a to flag, to then the from flag, and then depart on one of the radials or intercept the course that you need to track, right? Art did. Nope, 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 nope. Does that make sense though? The way I explained it. Are we clear on why that is the case? And if anyone here had to go down to Montgomery right now and fly the ODP off of 28 left, would you at least understand how? You may not be able to fly it, but you understand how now. Mary, if you saw this last year, I got to change these then, huh? I got to make these harder. All right. All right. Glad we're all on the same page here. I'm glad that the explanations are helping. So let's attempt this again. Okay. So don't, very simply, what most instructors try to impart is we have done very stupid things over the years. It's amazing what we've all accomplished by, you know, making mistakes and learning. And we just want to make sure that you guys don't, you know, end up like us. So here's another example for you. And this is an ODP out of Whiteman. So this was the most violated ODP that the Van Nuys FSDO ever had. So if you were to actually look up the ODP anymore, they don't have it as an ODP. They created it's no longer textual. It's actually a pictorial. And the way that this works is we have Los Angeles Airport, or basically Whiteman Airport here. And that is this one. And the other component that you're going to need to know is it's also basically talking about the Van Nuys Airport, which is this little blue dot here. Okay. So for a little bit of reference for those that are less familiar with the area, right here is basically the direction of the runway. And we are going to assume that we are going to be taking off on runway 30. So you can figure out that's the direction that we're heading. So based upon this information, the question that I've got to you guys is how would you fly the runway 30 ODP? And we've got runway 30, climbing left turn, heading 260 degrees. All aircraft climb to 4,500 via the Van Nuys radial 325, then climbing left turn, direct Van Nuys VOR DME. For Charles, with the RNAV or RNP, would it allow a curve towards Seal Beach? Not necessarily. They don't have. They have RNAV departures, or basically RNAV. Well, their RNAV departures usually as a SID, but ODPs are not based off of RNAV. All right, I'll give you guys about another 2 minutes or so. Right, Charles got it. And at the end of the class, for some of those that wanted me to draw the route or maybe needed a little bit more clarification, we can do that during the Q&A if you guys are around. So we can come back to that last example. About another minute or so. All right, Vince got it. Ryan got it. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this one as well. So very simply, we're gonna basically depart off of runway 30. We're gonna make a climbing left turn heading 260. So that's not too difficult. Basically, when we take off, kind of head in this general direction to a heading of 260 degrees. So that's easy enough. All aircraft climb to 4,500 feet via the radial 325 off of Van Nuys. So we've got the Van Nuys VOR DME basically right north of the airport. And let's see if we can approximate. See, that's 275, 300, 325 is looking something like this-ish. So I'm going to call that the 325 degree radial off of Van Nuys. And from here, I'm wondering if anybody had the wheels fall off the bus at this point. Not sure what to do. Looks straightforward, but we'll see. Like I said, this was the most violated ODP where the Van Nuys FSDO actually issued the most pilot deviations on. So let's just put this into perspective. Sometimes it makes it easier to kind of, understand the obvious things here. Airport elevation at Whiteman is about 1,000 feet. Airport elevation at Van Nuys is 800 feet. And if we were to look at the distance between the two airports, they're about, 3 or 4 miles apart, not too far apart. So you can clearly see that, the traffic pattern altitudes are going to be somewhere around 1,800 to 2,000 feet at both of these airports, give or take. Okay. So we got the first part, we made that left-hand turn, and now we've got the second part. And the number one mistake that people made was as they were trying to basically intercept this line here, the mistake was that they made a climbing left turn and they basically flew direct to the VOR. Okay, did anyone do that? Did anyone, once you got to the radial the 325 radial, did you make a left-hand turn and continue climbing as you approach the VOR? Yep. Okay, so the reason why this is the case is, think of it this way. Think of it as you're going on a freeway. Okay, I am going to Los Angeles via the 101 or whatever freeway is next to you. Via is basically traveling on the radial, which goes outbound. So here is the explanation back in the day for the Whiteman ODP, and this is the form that the Van Nuys FSDO actually handed out to a lot of pilots because this was such an issue. So you make your left-hand turn, and here's our radial, and as you can clearly see, the idea behind it is you're supposed to climb on this radial until you get to 4,500 feet. So basically, once you're at 4,500 feet, then you continue your climbing left turn, and then you basically track direct to the VOR, and then you can proceed on route. So you would basically continue climbing to whatever the initial altitude that they gave you. So a lot of times what they're going to do is when they give you a clearance, they will tell you, hey, I need you to climb to 5,000, okay? So I make my turn as soon as I get to 4,500. And this is going to be dependent upon the aircraft that you fly. For someone with a higher performance aircraft, they're probably going to do this a lot, sooner than someone that might take a little bit longer and maybe 160 horsepower aircraft. And then they would continue climbing. They would probably reach about 5,000 feet over here. And then you would just maintain 5,000 feet, cross the VOR, and then proceed on route. So because this was so heavily violated over the years, they actually removed the textual version because a lot of pilots didn't understand that it is considered, the word via is outbound in this case. They only go in one direction. They've actually made this into a pictorial version. Okay, so there's actually an image and it looks kind of like this, but it's more official rather than just the Van Nuys FSDO, right? So good job for those that got that one as well. But I think the main message that I want to share with you guys, in this regard is these are challenging, okay? And you need to understand them before you're going to have to accept it if that's what they want to give you. But if you do accept it, before you even get wheels up, make sure you understand it. If you're approaching a void time, tell them you need a longer period of time, or tell them to cancel it and you'll call them back in 5 or 10 minutes. But make sure to draw these out because what you have up here may not match what is actually going on. And really make sure that you have a decent understanding of ODPs, because it's the easiest way to get a violation, especially if you fly these incorrectly, right? So just make sure that you can clarify that, and have a decent idea of if there is an ODP that is available at the airport. Make sure that you maybe even understand it while you're still sitting in the FBO or the flight school, because you're not going to have an instructor around all the time. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the next set of instrument departures, which are known as SIDs, and these stand for Standard Instrument Departures. So a SID is actually, they're designed for a little bit more complicated transitions, and most SIDs out there are going to take you to the flight levels, but there are a number of SIDs, maybe 15 or 20%, that will take you to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 feet, something more manageable for our general aviation aircraft. But the rest of them are really going to take you up to those flight levels. So if you're going to an airport, let's say you're going to El Paso. Okay, El Paso is a GA airport, but it also has commercial operations. And you take a look at the different SIDs that are available at the airport, you could probably rule out maybe I think about 8 of them, except for one. And the other thing to also kind of note is if you're going into a larger airport that has multiple different SIDs, like for example, Los Angeles International has so many different departure procedures, it is just unimaginable. And the first thing that I look at for departure procedures is, what is your direction? So for Los Angeles International, we have departure procedures that are for aircraft going northbound up to San Francisco. We have ones that are going southbound towards Mexico. We've got ones that are going to Hawaii, and then elsewhere, further to the east. And a lot of times these departure procedures are for those specific routes. Then what I would do is, once I narrow it down to the 1 or 2 potential departure procedures, then I can kind of see, well, can my airplane do this or not? Is this turbojet specific, which a lot of them are? And can I even make the climb gradients even if it is not turbojet specific? So the SIDs are meant to coordinate the transition from the terminal environment to the en route phase of flight in an efficient manner while ensuring obstacle and terrain clearance. The SIDs are designed with obstacle clearance and are primarily used to reduce the workload and radio chatter between pilots and controllers by managing the traffic flow in an efficient way. You can imagine all of these instructions if the controller had to give this information blow by blow, turn by turn, altitude and speed restriction to 100 aircraft an hour. It would not be very efficient, and that's really one of the main reasons why they use these, is to reduce the workload and increase efficiencies. They are charted graphically, and they can also be found inside of your TPP book as well. So all you would do is go to the airport, and if there is a SID that exists, you would find it in that location. Now, all the SIDs often will include what is known as transition routes, and this basically makes the connection from the departure to an en-route airway a little bit more seamless. So I'll give you an example of this one. What we're going to do is, this is the bullet for departure for Santa Maria. So this is a departure procedure. And anytime you guys are looking at the departure procedures, I kind of cut this one in half because I want it to fit a little bit better on the screen. You've got your pictorial information on the right-hand side with everything charted, and then you always have the route description, which is the textual, somewhere either at the bottom, or if it doesn't fit on the page, it'll be on an additional page of that departure. So with this one, we usually have all of our communication frequencies in the upper left-hand corner, so really no different than what you guys see on airport diagrams. We actually have charted our takeoff minimum information if it applies, and then also our takeoff obstacle notes. We could find the same information in the TPP as well. The obstacle notes we have not discussed, but basically these are any obstacles within your departure path, and it will let you know how many either feet or miles away from the departure end of the runway it is, and then if it's right or left of the center line, and then potentially also the altitude or the AGL value as well. Everything else from here, we have the primary airport, which is Santa Maria, and then we can clearly see a lot of the transition paths that are basically available to us. So all of these, regardless of any of the runways that you're basically departing off of, we can see here in the textual portion that you would take off from runway 2, 12, or 30, and all of them are the same. We're going to make a climbing right turn to 190 degrees to intercept the Guadalupe 130 radial to the bullet intersection. Okay. So with this, I have the Guadalupe VOR, and then I've got the bullet intersection right here. Okay, so that's basically where everybody is going to fly to, and effectively that's kind of the starting point from wherever you're going. Now from there, it's going to be dependent upon the transition that you are assigned. So very simply, there are a number of different transitions here. We have the Fellows transition over here, and that's primarily if you're going to be heading out towards the Bakersfield area or further to the east. We have the Frams transition, which is that one right there. And the Frams transition is actually pretty simple. You're basically just going to make a left-hand turn and head in a given direction. And from there, you're going to go to the Frams intersection, and that's going to take you all the way up here. And then it'll basically allow you to proceed on course. Then what we've got is we've got two others. So the other ones that we have, I'll draw Frams real quick here for you guys, something like that. The other one that we have is going to be Gaviota or San Marcos, so one of the two. So Gaviota is going to basically take you from Bullet down to Gaviota, and then we have the San Marcos, that in the blue color. Sorry, these lines aren't perfectly straight here. Is basically going to take you further south as well. So Gaviota is probably going to take you to Santa Barbara. San Marcos will take you to the LA basin a little bit further. Okay, so anytime that you guys are assigned one of these, you want to make sure that number one, you can meet the takeoff requirements here, which are very, very important. So let's assume in this case that maybe I was assigned the Bullet 4 departure, this with the San Marcos transition, and we're going to take off from runway 30. I would want to double check that number one, I have the plate, it is valid. I would take a look at the information for runway 30. And it's telling me that it requires a minimum climb rate of 317 feet per nautical mile all the way up to 1900. My airplane cannot handle that, then I couldn't execute this departure procedure. It's that simple. For Cessnas and for most of us, we can actually do this, so that's not a problem. Then I would then basically read through and figure out which transition I was assigned. In this case, it's basically the blue one for San Marcos. And the other thing that you guys will also notice is when we file this information, here is actually how you file it. Okay, so with the departure routes, you have the ability to pre-file these. And it will always tell you the name of it. So it's the Bullet 4. And then what it does is it will tell you how, depending on what transition you want, you would then file, let's say, this one. Okay, so I might file something from, Santa Maria, and then I am basically requesting, wrong spelling there, and then I'm going to request the Bullet 4, and I'll put a .RZS transition, and then from there, it might be RZS and so forth. Whatever the rest of your flight plan happens to be to wherever you're heading, okay? But the way that you do it is it's always the first name, which is the bullet, which you can always find in the upper right-hand corner, the lower left-hand corner. And then if you're going to file the transition, just go ahead and take a look at the route description, and you want to basically use that full phrase. So if I were to put in this Bullet 4.RZS and I type that in, any type of flight planning tool, whether it's ForeFlight, Garmin Pilot, or anything else, or even flight service, it will register that as, okay, this pilot wants to fly the Bullet 4 departure, San Marcos transition, and it basically pulls all that information together. Okay, so if you guys are operating in an RNAV environment and you have a GPS on board, then I would encourage you guys to also load the Bullet 4 San Marcos transition into your GPS. And as you guys do this, you'll first look up the departure airport, you'll find the Bullet 4, and then you'll basically have a list of all of these different transitions to select from that point forward. So the charted transition routes allow pilots to transition from the end of the basic SID to a location in the en-route structure. And the transition routes fan out in various directions from the end of the basic SID to allow pilots to choose the transition route that takes them in the direction of the intended departure. A transition route includes a course, a minimum altitude, and distances between the fix. And when filing a SID for a specific transition route, include the transition in the flight plan using the correct departure and transition code. Okay, so if we were to look at some of the other information that's available to you, this is what we've got. We have an altitude, which is basically your MEA. We have some type of direction information, which happens to be 290 degrees. and we have the distance, which is from the VOR to the Pismo intersection. Okay. Once again, anytime that you guys are flying a departure procedure, make sure that you understand what the equipment requirements are, and make sure that you are set up so that way when you're departing, try to do, actually before you depart, try to do as much as you can on the ground. So if it was me departing from runway 30, if I have a GPS, I'm going to load everything in the GPS. I still need to, I would attempt to try to tune and identify the Guadalupe VOR on the ground, which you actually can from this airport because they're so close. And on my VOR, I would actually throw in the 130 radial because that way I immediately know that once I am on that 190-degree heading, all I need to do is intercept this radial and then track to this intersection. Okay. So if I intercept it, all I need to do is then figure out what is the radial that I'm tracking. So in this case, we are basically going outbound on the 130-degree radial or a 310 degrees. So just try to be as prepared as possible. If you forget all this stuff and you take off and you're trying to basically read the plate and interpret it and trying to tune and identify something and then trying to set up your VOR, it's your workload increases exponentially. So once again, the goal here is for you to do as much as possible and be as prepared as possible. And sometimes you can't grab the radials, or sometimes you can't grab the actual signal to tune and identify it. But even if I couldn't identify it, I would at least put the 130-degree radial on my VOR, so it's one less thing to really kind of have to worry about. Okay. All right. With that, I think that takes care of the SIDS. The SIDS are actually the easiest to comply with and basically utilize. When we come back from break, I will show you a quick video where someone's actually operating in a SID, so you can actually see all the steps that they do to brief the approach, or not the approach, but brief the actual departure procedure, comply with the different altitude restrictions and speed restrictions. Some of these have altitude and speed restrictions. This plate actually does not. And we'll show you something that's a bit more complicated yet more common within the aviation realm. So with that, let's go ahead and take our last 5-minute break here because we're at the top of the hour, and we'll come back. We'll push on with the departure procedures, and then we'll start actually very quickly getting into the en route structure here. So stretch your legs, and I'll see everybody back in 5. everybody, welcome back from break. So in this example, this is actually a video courtesy of Bold Method, in which we have an express jet, which is a regional airliner. I believe they're flying the 145 or the CRJ, one of the two. And what you're going to see is you'll actually see them, brief the information. Actually, number one, they'll pick up the clearance. They will then brief the actual departure procedure, and then they will also actually fly it and show you step by step exactly what they're doing. So this is going to be the Rita 5 departure. I will drop the link to the actual procedure. I believe it's out of Houston. And keep in mind that these departure procedure names, they're often updated. So the Rita 5, I think, is either now called the Rita 6 or the Rita 7 departure, but it's nearly identical at the same time. So with that, I want to give you guys a better understanding of kind of, the scope and size of the majority of these departure procedures, at least the SIDS. And this is basically the exact same thing as arrival. An arrival is literally a SID in reverse, basically taking you up from altitude and getting you back down so that way you can execute approach. So it's just the opposite. So with that, let us go ahead and watch this, and then when we come back, we will discuss.
All right, clear one.
AC 9115 Houston Tower, runway 15 right, line up and wait.
9115, line up and wait.
AC 9115, RNAV taps, runway 15 right, clear for takeoff.
RNAV to taps, clear for takeoff, 9115.
Set thrust.
Thrust is set, 82.4. 80 knots.
Checks.
Now 1432 Houston Tower, runway 15 left, line up and wait, wind 1006.
V1, rotate.
When you're training for your instrument rating, you usually spend most of your time learning how to land in an airport, shooting instrument approaches. You usually don't spend nearly as much time learning how to depart under IFR. But if you're flying out of a congested area or if you're climbing high, keeping arriving and departing traffic separated can be a little tricky. That's where departure procedures come in. They're like an instrument approach in reverse, keeping you separated from traffic as you climb out of the terminal area. If you're flying a jet or a turboprop, you'll fly them all the time. And today, we get to fly one in an ERJ with ExpressJet. You typically find departure procedures in major terminal areas, like Denver or Houston. They're only flown by aircraft on an IFR flight plan, even if the weather is clear. And they're usually reserved for aircraft climbing into, or at least close to, the flight levels. But some airports use them for nearly all IFR aircraft. Take Salt Lake City. If you're departing in a single-engine piston and leaving under IFR, ATC will often assign the Salt Lake 3 departure. While every departure procedure keeps you clear of terrain, some DPs are published simply for terrain avoidance. Most are simply written instructions, but some are charted graphically. They're called Obstacle Departure Procedures, or ODPs. Take Walden, Jackson County, Colorado. The airport's in the middle of the mountains and doesn't have any services, but the Walroo 1 Obstacle Departure Procedure helps you climb out without bumping into anything. But by far, most of the charted departure procedures are published to manage traffic. They're called Standard Instrument Departures, but you'll usually hear them called SIDS, and you can group them into 3 types. In a radar vector procedure, ATC will give you vectors to your course. The procedure may give you an altitude to climb to, and it provides instructions to follow if you lose your radios. Standard pilot-navigated procedures use ground-based nav aids like VORs and localizers to help you navigate a course out of the terminal area, though you can fly them with a GPS or an RNAV system if they're in your database. The LINS 8 out of Aspen is a great example of that. RNAV departure procedures do the same thing, except they can only be flown by GPS or an RNAV system, and they use waypoints instead of radials and nav aids. If ATC wants you to fly a departure procedure, they'll usually assign it to you in your initial departure clearance. Sometimes they'll only want you to fly the lateral course and will assign you a specific altitude, like this flight we took from Denver Centennial to Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Centennial clearance Cirrus 333 Alpha November and is looking for IFR clearance to Santa Fe.
Cirrus 333 Alpha November, Centennial clearance, good morning. You're cleared to the Sierra Alpha Foxtrot Airport via the Pikes 7 departure. Alamosa transition then as filed. Climb via the SID correction, climb and maintain 8,000. Denver departure frequency 132.75, squawk 2707.
Okay, Cirrus 333 Alpha November is cleared to Sierra Alpha Foxtrot via the Pikes 7 departure, Alamosa transition, then is filed. Climb maintain 8,000. Departure 132.75, squawk 2707.
03 Alpha November, your readback's correct. Just let me know on ground when your run-up complete. 8th November is current.
We'll talk to you when run-up's done. 3 Alpha November.
In this case, ATC wanted us to climb immediately up to 8,000 without restrictions. That's why they said climb and maintain. Other times they'll ask you to climb via the SID instead of climb and maintain. So then you'll meet every altitude restriction along the route until you reach the SID's top altitude. And that's where our RITA 5 departure comes in. To show the process, ExpressJet flew an ERJ from Houston George Bush Intercontinental to Corpus Christi and back so that we could film the procedures. In this case, we plan to fly the RITA 5 departure out of Houston using the Corpus Christi transition. Here's their departure briefing.
RITA 5 departure with 4,000 first stop, and then probably the climb via after that with multiple altitudes to watch out for, and then Corpus transition.
Houston Intercontinental usually uses a digital clearance that prints out inside the aircraft, but this time we called for clearance on the radio so you can hear the route.
Hey, good morning, clearance. AC 9115 with Bravo, looking for a clearance, negative PDC.
AC 9115 is cleared to Intercontinental Airport via RITA 5 departure, Corpus transition, and then as filed. Climb via SID except maintain 4,000, squawk 4573.
All right, 9115 is on the RITA 5 Corpus transition. Climb via the SID, except maintain 4,000 and 4573 on the box, 9115.
AC 9115, readback correct. Advise this frequency ready for taxi.
Roger, thanks for your help.
So the clearance is exactly as we planned, except ATC revised the top altitude for the procedure to 4,000 feet instead of 16,000. On takeoff, tower tells us to join the transition via RNAV.
AC 9115, RNAV taps, runway 15 right, clear for takeoff.
RNAV to taps, clear for takeoff, 9115.
RNAV to taps, give us the whole thing.
All right, lights are up. Forward takeoff checks.
It's 15 right.
Complete.
All right, here we go. Good.
Good to go.
All right. Set thrust.
And we're off and climbing. At 600 feet, per the chart, we go direct to taps.
There's 600.
There's their 600. FRA.
All right. Yeah, flight level change. Flap 0. Set E climb.
As we contact departure, they re-clear us to climb via the RITA 5 departure, which means our revised top altitude of 4,000 feet has been canceled.
AC 9115, contact departure.
Departure 9115. Good morning, departure 9115 is with you out of 2,700 for 4,000.
AC 9115, Houston departure radar contact, climb via the RITA 5 departure.
Okay, climb via 9115. All right, climbing via, so taps at or below 4, and then bottle at or below 5.
Okay.
We need to climb via the SID to the published top altitude of 16,000 and cross taps at or below 4,000. That's why the 4,000 is shown under the line. After taps, we climbed across bottle at or below 5,000.
There's 5 for bottle.
All right, 5 set.
We're at taps, so up we go.
As we cross bottle, things change. We need to cross Flyza at or above 7,000. The 7,000 is above the line.
Okay, and this is our last at or below, then we can climb to 16.
Just set 16.
16 is set.
16 set.
So we have to climb 2,000 feet in 5 miles. If you were heavy and it was hot, that might be a difficult restriction to comply with. But not today. We're pretty much empty.
All right. Made the Flyzer, made the Winio. Rita's at 10. Making that too.
Yeah. All right, 310. Flaps, speed, and sterile.
And from that, each of the following restrictions, Wino at or above 9,000 and Rita at or above 10,000, are no problem. They've bugged 16,000 and we're waiting for our cruise altitude.
AC 9115, contact Houston Center 128.6. Good day.
128.6. Thanks for your up today, guys.
You're welcome.
I'm 66 Alpha Mike, contact Houston Center 126.42.
Good morning, Center. AC 9115 with you out of 11.6 for 16,000.
AC 9115, Houston Center, climb maintain flight level 220.
220 at 9115.
And with center, we get it, up to flight level 220 for cruise. And that's it. We're off to Corpus Christi. You can see that a SID really isn't that complicated to fly, but with lots of restrictions, a climb via can get you into trouble fast if you get behind the plane. You can see how they brief the entire departure procedure both on the ground and as they cross each fix, so that there's never any confusion, which is a great idea no matter what you fly, and even if you're flying single pilot.
All right, and as always, I would encourage you guys to check out Bold Method. Their website has a lot of good content, a lot of quizzes, and a lot of great information. And also, they put out quite a bit of different live streams on different topics, including quite a few IFR topics if you want to go even more in depth. And you can find out that information on the YouTube site as well. All right, so after talking about kind of all this information about the initial portions of these different departure procedures, which clearance procedures may be issued by ATC without prior pilot request? Is A, DP, stars, and contact approaches, B, contact and visual approaches, or C, DP, stars, and visual? First couple answers rolling in, and is the link or anybody else that basically wants to watch that again or check out any of the other content that Bold Method folks have. I got about half the class in, just waiting for the other folks as well. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at it. Sorry if I cut off anyone. We got 59, almost 60% with A. Got 9% with B and 31% with C. So let's look at what we've got. So we know that departure procedures, stars, which are arrivals that we talked about briefly. Stars are just the opposite of SIDs. So remember that departure procedures is made up of either ODPs or they could be standard instrument departures. So that's departure procedures in a nutshell. So we know that departure procedures may be issued by ATC without any request of the pilot. We also know that arrivals could be issued as well, so that's looking good. Visual approaches are also going to be maybe issued without ATC clearance. So the only one that is not issued, and we'll talk more about these on the approach phase, is the contact approaches. So contact approaches are a special type of approach, and only the pilot can request the contact approach. So that is the reason why C in this case is correct. It's basically departure procedures, stars, which are standard arrivals or standard instrument arrivals, and then a visual approach, which is something that you could either request or ATC could provide to you as well. All right, so good job for those that got that. All right, pushing on, the last two that we're going to talk about is going to be the diverse vector areas. These are a little bit more unusual, and these are known as DVAs. So the diverse vector area may be established below the minimum vectoring altitude or minimum IFR altitude in a radar environment at the request of air traffic control. So this type of departure procedure meets the TERPS criteria for diverse departures, obstacles, and terrain avoidance in which random radar vectors may be below the minimum vectoring altitudes or the minimum IFR altitudes that they normally issue. The existence of a DVA will be noted in the takeoff minimums of the ODP section, basically within the TPP. So your terminal procedures publication, what we've been looking at when you guys looked at all the takeoff information, the obstacle departure information, all of that, if there is a DVA listed, it would be found in there. So this is an example of one. They're very easy to do. This is for San Diego, Gillespie Field, and it depends on whichever runway you're going to be operating off of. We'll go with the first one here to make it easy. So we've got runway 27 left and heading as assigned by ATC. Pretty simple, just turn right, left, fly straight, whatever heading they give you. And then it's going to require a minimum climb of 320 feet per nautical mile to 1,200 feet. So pretty much every aircraft can do that. So these are very, very simple. Sometimes these can also be charted as well. And the charted versions just have literally a ton of different VORs on them, and they say the exact same thing. It's literally just going to say the heading is assigned by ATC, and they're going to give you some type of mandatory climb gradient that you have to comply with to whatever the altitude is that's listed. That one's pretty simple. The last one is a little bit more unusual, and you'll find this at different locations throughout the country, primarily in locations where we are at higher elevations, or for example in Henderson, where density altitude becomes more of an issue, especially on those warmer days. So this is called the VCOA, or a visual climb over airport. And a visual climb over airport is a departure option for an IFR aircraft operating in VMC or equal to or greater than the specified visibility and ceiling. And what you're basically doing is you're visually climbing over the airport, basically making circles over the airport to whatever the required altitude is, and then from that point, then they're going to basically release you and have you proceed on route once you get to the final altitude. Now, the VCOA is going to be a departure option, and it's developed when obstacles are farther than 3 statute miles from the airport, and it does require a climb gradient of more than 200 feet per nautical mile. Just depends. Okay. These are also found in the TPP as well, under the takeoff minimums and the obstacle departure procedures section. So this is an example from South Lake Tahoe, and this is one that we use quite frequently on instrument check rides. The examiners like to send people up here because it's more challenging. And if you were to actually look at some of the departure procedures that are available to you, so this is a departure procedure. Let's see, you would be typically taking off from the north, so it's runway 36, and very simply it would be climb to a heading and then intercept and then basically proceed on course. And the main thing is like if you look at most of the takeoff requirements, so if I go up here to the takeoff minimums and I look at the runway 36, what I've got is a climb rate of 755 feet per nautical mile to 6,500 feet. Okay. So if you're going any faster than 60 knots, you're going to be, if you're maybe climbing at 70 knots along the ground as your ground speed, you're probably going to be climbing at 850 feet per minute. And that's going to be challenging for most general aviation aircraft. Most GA aircraft don't have the capability to do that. So if you're struggling with performance requirements, or maybe, you might have to look at if there is this option available. So the flip side of it is where I would start off with is number one, does this exist? And this does. We've got the VCOA. This is going to be based off of runway 18. And what we'd want to do is we would actually look at the runway minimums for runway 18. And we would need to make sure that we had these weather requirements right here. It'd need to be a 5,100 foot ceiling and 5 statute miles of visibility to basically utilize the visual climb over airport. And then to do this, we would obtain ATC approval for the VCOA when requesting the IFR clearance, climb in visual conditions to cross South Lake Tahoe Airport at or above 11,200 feet MSL, and then we basically intercept and proceed on the SWR, I think that's Hangtown VOR maybe, the radial 127 to the VOR, and then we basically proceed on route. So you can circle for 30 or 40 minutes to get to that altitude, which is going to be far better than, probably attempting, the other departure procedures at this particular airport. So if you are in certain circumstances, obviously, ways of dealing with density altitude issues are obviously leave in the early mornings or late or early evenings when the temperature is lower, or for the most part, it makes things more challenging in the IFR world just because we have to comply with these climb gradients. And a lot of times we don't have the power to do that. And in this case, the 755 feet, you might be able to maintain that for a little bit, but you may not be able to do it for the entire duration of the climb to whatever the final altitude is. All right. So that is basically it for your departure procedures. We'll spend the next 30 minutes covering the IFR en route procedures, and we'll kind of go and spend the majority of our time actually in this section talking about your IFR en route low charts, or your low IFR charts. So your IFR charts are basically broken into all of these different L charts. There's quite a few of them, and a lot of them will overlap in the area. And if you guys have a copy of this, I would encourage you guys to get it out, or if you just want to follow along on skyvector.com while I'm kind of going over some of the symbology, you can see, and you can see if what we're talking about at the moment, you can kind of spot in whatever area you happen to be looking at. So there are two different types of IFR charts. We have IFR, basically the en route low altitude charts, and then we have the high altitude charts. Pretty simple. All of the IFR low altitude charts are going to provide the aeronautical information for navigation under IFR conditions, anything below 18,000 feet. So really anything excluding class alpha airspace. They're also far more detailed. They provide a lot more information. If you get into the high altitude charts, anytime you're operating above or within class alpha, then you want to be using the high altitude en route charts as well. So in some cases, if you are operating a higher performance aircraft, you might need to carry both sets with you. So if you're following along in SkyVector, I forget, just find one that says L. It'll say L with a number after it. Just click on any one of those, and that'll take you to the en route charts, or the world low. World low works as well. All right, so the first thing that you're gonna hear quite a bit about is going to be your IFR minimum altitudes. And there's a number of different acronyms that we're going to cover, but the main thing that you want to kind of keep into consideration is that no matter what type of altitude we're talking about, MEA, OROCA, MOCA, any of these 3 or 4 letter acronyms, it provides at least 1,000 feet of clearance in non-mountainous areas and 2,000 feet of clearance in mountainous areas. That's the minimum, obstacle clearance that it provides. Okay. So where we find this information is once again in the AIM Chapter 5. If you go to like the last 2 pages of Chapter 5, you'll see this chart of the United States here. And this is actually shaded a light blue color. But basically, this is how we know what is considered mountainous by the FAA and what is not considered mountainous. And really, there's 2 areas. You have basically the Appalachians on the East Coast, and then pretty much all of the West Coast, except for the central valley of California, is going to be considered mountainous terrain. So anytime that we're looking at altitudes in those 2 areas that I circled, you are guaranteed 2,000 feet of clearance above the highest obstacle. The rest of the country, the eastern seaboard, Florida, and the Midwest, you guys are all in the non-mountainous area, which is going to be guaranteeing at least 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle, right? So this is a good page to flag to make sure that you are able to answer that question for the examiner. And I would also encourage you guys, when you guys are going through these, and you will have to basically talk about every single one of these altitudes, and anything on the chart is going to be fair game. Do not answer the question in, if I was the examiner and I said, well, what's an MEA? And you just told me the definition, and MEA is a minimum en route altitude. It's like pulling teeth at that point. Okay, so you want to try to give a complete answer to that. Yes, that is the definition, but there's a lot more to it. I'll tell you what a more appropriate answer here is in a second. So let's talk about this minimum en route altitude, which is known as an MEA. So the MEA is the lowest published altitude between radio fixes that assures acceptable navigation signal coverage and meets obstacle clearance requirements between those fixes. MEAs for routes wholly contained within controlled airspace normally provide a buffer above the floor of controlled airspace consisting of at least 300 feet within the transition areas and 500 feet within the control areas. And then MEAs are established based upon obstacle clearance over terrain, man-made objects, adequacy of navigation facility performance, and communication requirements. So very simply, when you guys start looking at your en-route charts, here we have some VOR with a Victor Airway 230, and then off the chart here, there's basically another VOR tied to it somewhere down the line. So this Victor Airway, Victor 230, we've got a bunch of numbers above and below it. And the one that we want to pay attention to is this value right here, which is 5,500 feet. And that is going to be considered the MEA for basically the Victor 230. Okay. So the reason why we can tell it's an MEA is that it is above the Victor Airway. It does not have an asterisk or anything else. You'll notice that this one does have an asterisk below it, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. And anytime you have an MEA, it is guaranteeing you obstacle clearance. All of them guarantee you obstacle clearance depending upon if you're in mountainous areas, you get 2,000 feet of clearance. If you're in non-mountainous areas, you get 1,000. You're also guaranteed VOR reception, okay? So I am guaranteed reception anywhere along that Victor Airway as long as I switch at the halfway point or if there is a VOR changeover point that we'll look at here in a minute. Okay, so I need to be at or above that altitude. Now, at no point in time are you ever guaranteed radar reception. So it doesn't mean that ATC can see you, nor are you ever guaranteed radio communications with ATC. Okay. So those are never guaranteed things if you're at this published altitude. And keep in mind, this is the minimum en route altitude. So when we're looking at this type of altitude, we still have to abide by our direction of travel, and it's either has to be an even or odd thousand. So in this case, even though it's 5,500, I can't fly at that because that's a VFR altitude. I either need to be flying this route at basically 6,000 or 7,000 feet. So once again, if I'm the examiner and I ask you, well, what is an MEA? The more appropriate answer is an MEA is a minimum en route altitude, and I would actually point to one on an IFR chart. The minimum en route altitude guarantees obstacle clearance of at least 2,000 feet of mountainous, obstacle clearance of at least 2,000 feet in mountainous areas and 1,000 feet in non-mountainous areas. And you can find this information, show them exactly where it is in Chapter 5 of the AIM. It's the second to last page, and basically point out the differences between the blue section and the white section like we did. And then, in addition to obstacle clearance, you also want to basically know that it also provides guaranteed VOR reception when we're on the Victor Airway and we switch over from one VOR to another, either at the halfway point or what's known as the changeover point, the COP point. Okay, so that is a more appropriate answer. If you just answer what the definition is, like the most basics, oh, well, it's a minimum en route altitude. It's like pulling teeth for the examiner, and we see this quite a bit. Well, what does the minimum en route altitude provide? Oh, well, it provides obstacle clearance. Well, what type of obstacle clearance? Oh, like 1,000 feet in non-mountainous areas. What about the other types of air? Oh, 2,000 feet. Well, where do you find, it just goes on and on. So if you want kind of an easy way to make your life a little bit simpler when it comes down to these things, try to give a complete answer as long as you know it's correct information, and it'll also put you on better footing as well. All right, so that is your MEA. That is your minimum en route altitude. The next one that we're going to talk about is going to be what is known as a MOCA altitude. And this is your minimum obstacle clearance altitude. These are the altitudes that basically have an asterisk in front of them, and they're always going to be below the MEA. Okay, so not every portion of a Victor Airway or a route is going to have a MOCA. So very simply, if we look off of Bakersfield here, this is an MEA, and it doesn't have a MOCA. But if we look at this one here, we can see I covered up the 6,000 foot MEA, but there's also a MOCA of 4,500 feet right below it. Or we've got a 3,000 foot MEA and a 3,000 foot MOCA. And this right here, the 4,000 with the arrow, is designating that, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Pilot, look a little bit further to the left here and you'll realize that there is a higher MEA coming up. So that's kind of just letting you know that there is a higher MEA. Actually, it's hiding. It's based on the direction of travel. If we were to remove this red box, the MEA going this way is 3,000 and the MEA going that way is 4,000. So the MOCA is the lowest published route, as we said, and the big difference between this is, once again, this provides obstacle clearance. It does not guarantee radar reception, nor does it guarantee radio communications. And the big difference here is that the MEA guarantees VOR reception, but the MOCA only guarantees it within 22 nautical miles or 25 statute miles, depending on how you're calculating it. Okay, so in these types of circumstances, you have to be careful because you may not be able to fly this Victor airway for its entire length based upon the VOR system. So a lot of times, if you are going to be flying the MOCA, you need to have some other type of equipment on board, such as a GPS, so that way you can navigate once you exceed the 22 nautical miles away from the VOR. Okay, so the MOCAs seen on the en route chart may have been computed by adding the required obstacle clearance, known as OROCA, to the controlling obstacle in the primary area, or computed using a TERPS chart if the controlling obstacle is located in the secondary area, right? So some of the questions people ask are, well, why wouldn't I fly the lower one or the higher one? And once again, it is based upon the VOR reception. If you are a VOR only equipped aircraft, you are only going to be able to fly or utilize the VOR system or the guaranteed reception for 22 nautical miles or 25 statute miles. Beyond that, there's no guarantees, and you really need to be an RNAV or GPS equipped aircraft to continue. There are benefits for flying lower, especially if potentially there is some weather circumstances or issues. Maybe you have icing at 6,000 feet over here. So to be at 5,000 feet, you might be a few degrees warmer where you're not going to pick up icing. That would be, a reason to choose a lower altitude. Sometimes it's beneficial, and sometimes it's beneficial to be higher as well. Maybe the winds aloft are going to be forecasted to be, provide you a stronger tailwind and be more in your favor when it comes to performance if you fly at higher altitudes, which will always give you a faster true airspeed as well. Okay, so just make sure that if you are flying on the MOCA, that you understand what that restriction is, and you are preferably have some other way to navigate the rest of the airway. The airways from one VOR to another are never 22 nautical miles. Most of the time they're 50, 60, 70, 80 nautical miles long. So you would be at a disadvantage because you can only really navigate for a very small fraction of that. All right, the next one that we have is called the OROCA, which is the off-route obstacle clearance altitude. So very simple. If you guys remember from your private pilot training on the VFR charts, we have lines of latitude and longitude that basically make up the quadrangle, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And within that quadrangle, you guys had something known as a maximum elevation figure, or MEF. And it's very similar to the maximum elevation figure, except the OROCA is going to be computed using something similar to the maximum elevation figure, except it's also adding in the buffer of at least 1,000 foot for non-mountainous and 2,000 feet for mountainous areas as the actual buffer when you're flying. So the off-route obstacle clearance altitude, or OROCA, is going to represent the highest possible obstruction elevation, including both terrain and other vertical obstruction data, towers, trees, etc., bounded by the ticked lines of latitude and longitude, including data 4 nautical miles outside of the quadrant as well. So if you look at this quadrant here, I've kind of covered up the latitude and longitude time lines just to make it kind of obvious, but they are directly underneath that red box there. And what I've circled is the OROCA altitude. So this OROCA altitude is 11,100 feet. And the only thing that it provides is guaranteed obstacle clearance. It does not guarantee VOR reception, does not guarantee radar reception, and it does not guarantee radio communications. So the reason why we would use this, and potentially remember that Victor Airways are not necessarily the most efficient means of getting from point A to point B. If I am flying on a Victor Airway, if I need to maybe get over here, and I am only using Victor Airways, and I'm coming from, let's say, Camarillo, you know, the most direct way is obviously to fly direct. But in these circumstances, I may have to do something like that. Or if the altitudes are too high, I might actually have to start getting creative and going a longer way to get to my final destination as well. So the OROCAs, the only time you can use an OROCA if you are going to fly off route, which means that you're not using a Victor Airway, is you would have to do GPS direct. You have to be RNAV equipped, and you would be operating using the GPS system. The reason why that's the case is that the FAA has tested all of these Victor Airways. They have figured out, you know, they have guaranteed you, the pilot, that, hey, if you're using the Victor Airway and you follow our instructions, you will have a reception using the VOR system. The problem is that if, you know, they do not do that if I start flying in my own way and start, you know, even though I might still have VOR reception to do this, there's no guarantee that it will, you know, it's 100% through the entire flight, because honestly, it hasn't been tested. So if you want to fly direct, I would need to be at or above the OROCA, and I would also need to be GPS equipped as well, and then I could fly direct. The other thing as well is that you remember that the OROCA represents the lowest altitude. So in this case, if I am basically heading, this would be westbound, almost northwest bound. So this would actually be at an even altitude. I cannot file at 11,100. This entire flight would basically be done at 12,000 feet. So I need to be at 12,000 feet. Or, you know, some cases, if I'm obviously heading eastbound, I will probably need to be at 13,000 feet. Okay, so it is far more challenging to fly OROCAs or to go direct on the West Coast. Okay, if you are, and I'll show you exactly what I mean here in 1 second. If you look at the OROCAs, you have to take into consideration all of the OROCAs that you're going to fly through, and you need to be at or above those OROCAs. Okay. Does the GPS need to be WAAS capable? No, it does not. Just needs to be GPS, some type of IFR certified GPS in order to do that. So if I go ahead and pull up the en route load chart, okay, and we're just looking at kind of the corner of California, Nevada, and so forth. You look at some of these values, right? This value over here, 16.8, okay? This is obviously the mountainous area. We have 12.1. Which is, you know, this is considered flatland right here, but because it falls within the bounds of the lat and long, it's 12,100 feet. 7,600, not too bad. 7,500, etc., etc. But anyways, the majority of the altitudes here, 13.4, 11.7, 11.7, 14.1, 12.9, 10.3, they're all very, very high. And for the most part, for general aviation aircraft, we are going to be hard pressed to be at or above these altitudes. So it's less realistic for us to actually fly direct, okay? We compare this with the middle part of the country where everybody flies direct. So I head over to, I don't even know what part of the country this is, but we're somewhere past the Rockies and everything. And if we look at the Midwest, we've got 2,900 in this quadrant, 3,700, 4,200, 3,900, 4,2, 4,2, 3,7, okay? You're kind of getting the idea. And the reality is if you do fly in this part of the world, looks like this is covering in the Kansas area, which is fairly flat. Most everybody just flies direct if you have GPS. There's no reason to be at the Victor Airways except for practice. So the most efficient routing is literally just to be at about 5,000, 6,000 feet, pretty much anywhere in the Midwest, and you'll be at the OROCA. And then as long as you got a certified GPS, you just go direct from point to point, and that's honestly the fastest way to get around. Now, when you depart the airport, just keep in mind that, for example, if we were departing this Emporia Municipal Airport right here, which we can see that falls within the 3,700, the air traffic controllers will start you off on a Victor Airway. So if we maybe started off of this 327 radial and headed northbound towards this intersection, we cannot request direct until we're at or above 3,700 feet. So once we're at 3,700 feet, then I can ditch the VOR or the airway here, and then I can proceed in the direction that I need to. Okay, so Just keep that in mind. For most of you in the Midwest, you're going to have a bit of an easier time just because the OROCAs are so low, as long as you got that GPS. All right, the next one that we've got is called the MVA, which is called your minimum vectoring altitude. And the MVAs are going to be established they're primarily used by air traffic control. Once again, it guarantees obstacle clearance 2,000 feet in mountainous areas, 1,000 feet in non-mountainous areas. And it does not guarantee anything else. It doesn't guarantee VOR reception, does not guarantee radar reception, does not guarantee radio communications. Okay. And because of the ability to isolate specific obstacles, some MVAs may actually be lower than MEAs or MOCAs or any other minimum altitudes depicted. But keep in mind, MVAs always will at least give you the obstacle clearance of those values. So while you're being radar vectored, IFR altitude assignments by ATC are normally at or above the MVA. And then air traffic controllers use the MVAs only when they're assured an adequate radar return is being received from that aircraft. So if we look at this radar control screen on the left-hand side, you can see that the controller has different segments that they monitor, and we can see what the MVAs are. So even though that you might be flying along, and give you an example here, you guys might be flying along on a Victor Airway, and you're saying to yourself, okay, so I am on Victor 5, let's say Victor 10 here, okay? And the MEA is 5,000 feet, and we can see the MOCA is 2,600 feet, but the controller said that I can go down to 1,500 feet. Well, you'll notice that the MVAs, the minimum vectoring altitudes, are not actually published on our en route charts. There's another document where they're published, and they are available to the public. They're just not easy to really read or interpret the locations. And this is more information that the controllers are going to have offhand. So if they give you a lower altitude than what you see as published, do not be alarmed. They have to meet the criteria of at least 1,000 feet in non-mountainous areas in Kansas where we're at, or 2,000 feet in those mountainous areas as well. Okay, so that is the last one here. That's your minimum vectoring altitude. So become familiar with all of those, and make sure that you're able to basically identify each one on the chart as well moving forward. The other thing, since I have it up as well, is this right here is known as a VOR changeover point. So anytime that we're flying along the airway, let's assume that we have an airway from VOR to VOR, and it's a total of 80 nautical miles. Well, that's pretty simple. If there is no VOR changeover point, we change over at the midpoint. So half of 80 nautical miles would be 40 nautical miles. So if I'm flying outbound from one VOR, once I get to 40 nautical miles, I'll basically switch the reception in the VORs, and I'll track inbound on the other VOR. In some circumstances, the FAA is printed, kind of looks like a little bit of an S here. What is going to be the appropriate changeover point if it's not going to be the halfway point? So very simply, if I am flying outbound off of the Emporia VOR on the 039 radial, and you can see here, this is Victor 502, then what I do is I would switch over at the 40 nautical mile point. So at 40 nautical miles, I am going to switch over to the other side of this VOR, which is all the way up here. And that happens to be the Kansas City VOR over here. If I'm flying down the Kansas City VOR on Victor 502, once I get to the 49 nautical miles DME, from Kansas City, then I would switch over to the Emporia for the rest of the way. Okay, so you can see that it's not truly in the the half or midpoint here, and that's the reason why they use the changeover point. All right, the next one that we've got is called the minimum crossing altitude and the minimum reception altitude. So we've got an MCA and an MRA. So the first one is going to be the MCA. So the minimum crossing altitude is the lowest altitude at certain fixes at which the aircraft must cross when proceeding in the direction of a higher minimum en route IFR altitude. So the MCAs are established in all cases where obstacles intervene to prevent pilots from maintaining obstacle clearance during a normal climb to a higher MEA after passing a point beyond which the higher MEA applies. The same protected en route area vertical obstacle clearance requirements for the primary and secondary areas are considered in the determination of your minimum crossing altitude. So let's make that a lot easier rather than having it be so wordy here. So very simply, your minimum crossing altitude is something that you have to be at or above at a certain location. So right here over Camarillo, we can clearly see that we've got Victor 27, and the MEA on Victor 27 is 5,000 feet. If you were going to continue on Victor 27 485 and you're heading in this general direction, which happens to be northwest bound, we can see at the Henner intersection here, the way that we're able to identify an MCA is this flag. It's basically a flag with an X in it over a specific location. Traditionally, it's going to be over a waypoint. So if I want to continue on Victor 485 and I'm going northwest bound, I need to be at 6,500 feet when I cross Henner intersection. Okay, so that's the reason why we call it a minimum crossing altitude. The reason why is if we actually looked and we continued up northwest, up Victor 485 there, you're going to see that the altitude is significantly higher. Let's take a look at that real quick here. Let me bring up Camarillo and let's see. Let's find the intersection. So right here, this was for Victor 485 that we were talking about. Here's the minimum crossing altitude at Henner. And I want you guys to pay attention to this, is if we were to basically follow this up, let's do this real quick here. Let's get rid of all of this and that right there. Go back to Camarillo. So if we were to part Camarillo and we were basically heading to Henner, and I'll assume that we would, intercept this VOR right here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically continue all the way up here to the Fellows. Okay, so we're basically going to follow that pink line. So the reason why there's a minimum crossing altitude is that we've got 5,000 feet for the MEA, and that's not a big deal. If you were to continue up this line, you're going to notice that eventually it will be at 9,000 feet for the MEA. Okay, the MEA, the increase actually is right here during this entire leg. Okay, so what they're doing is if we actually took this into a VFR roll, you can see that there's a significant amount of mountainous terrain to the northwest if you were to continue towards the Henner VOR. And essentially what they're doing is that if you maintained your climb rate and you went from 5,000 feet for this first segment here, and then you had to increase it to 9,000, you wouldn't be able to actually maintain your obstacle clearance requirements. Okay, so there is something known as a standard for determining the minimum crossing altitude, and it's really based off of these climb gradients that come from the TERPs. So very, very simply, if you have a difference or basically an altitude or an MEA anywhere between sea level and 5,000 feet, the expectation is that you will climb at 150 feet per nautical mile. If you have an altitude anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 feet, that decreases to 120 feet per nautical mile. And if it's over 10,000 feet, that will be at 100 feet per nautical mile. So essentially what they're saying is that because of the increase from 5,000 on this segment to 9,000, and in that circumstance, they need you to be at a climb rate greater than 120 feet per nautical mile in order to, miss all those mountains to the northwest. So effectively what ends up happening is that you will make sure, and ATC will also make sure, that you will be at 6,500 if we're basically continuing northwest bound in this example. Now, if I was coming over here from Santa Barbara or actually I was going the other way. If I'm headed towards Santa Barbara on Victor 186, you'll notice that there's another one here. Actually, the other way. I'm leaving Santa Barbara, trying to go eastbound here. And if I'm going eastbound on Victor 186, I need to be at or above 5,100 feet at Henner, and then I would actually continue my climb and I need to be above 6,300 feet. In this case, I would want to climb to at least 7,000 feet because my direction of travel is east, and that would be an odd 1,000 altitude, right? That's your minimum crossing altitude in a nutshell. All of those, requirements of 150, 120, or 100 feet per nautical mile, that is not required. No one's ever going to ask you that. Just keep in mind that if we are going from, one MEA here to another MEA, what they're basically basing this off of is that, from 5,000 feet to 9,000 feet, which is that significant increase, they are expecting per the book that you're climbing at 120 feet per nautical mile. But if those mountains are a bit closer and they need you to climb a bit quicker, that's the reason why they say, oh, no, that's not going to work. If this guy is only climbing at 120 feet, then they're probably going to impact terrain or be too close, or, it's just not going to work. So what we want to do here is, hey, we need you to be at 6,500 feet, and then you can continue that standard climb rate of 120 feet per nautical mile. And that is all the technical stuff, the mumbo jumbo that they calculate using the TERPS guidance. Okay. The other one that we have on the right-hand side is called a minimum reception altitude. That is known as an MRA. And very simply, it's basically going to the FAA flight inspection team, who basically goes through and flies every single one of these routes and all the different approaches all the time to make sure that it truly does provide navigational signals and everything else. They will go through, and if in the event that there is some type of reason where you cannot get a navigational signal, then you need to be at a specific altitude. Okay, so when the MRA at the fix is higher than the MEA, the MRA is going to be established for the fix and is the lowest altitude at which an intersection can be determined. So if we look at the Ojai intersection here, we can see basically a flag, and instead of an X, it actually has an R, which basically stands for your MRA. And at Ojai, in order to identify the Ojai intersection, you have to be at 9,000 feet. So once again, if we look at this, and we were just here just a second ago. So if I bring up the Ojai intersection here, and I were to, let's swing this across. So here's the Fillmore VOR, and I am going to drag it directly to the San Marcos VOR. So here are the Victor 386, 597 between the two VOR points. So we've got San Marcos on the left, and we have Fillmore on the right. So there's actually multiple ways to identify the Ojai intersection. So keep that in mind. These are usually actually exam questions that the DPs ask. So there's actually, I think, 4, maybe 5 different ways. The first way and the easiest way is that this is a GPS waypoint. So if you are RNAV GPS equipped or capable, I would just put in Ojai, and that's my GPS point, and I'll be able to identify the intersection. The other way of doing it is I could actually use distance measuring equipment. So for example, if I am coming from San Marcos, I know that it's 23 nautical miles. This 23 down here represents the 23 nautical miles between the VOR and the Ojai intersection. The 45 in the square represents the total distance between the VOR to VOR. So the total distance is 45 nautical miles. But if I'm on the 087 radial, or basically flying away from the VOR, and I'm 23 nautical miles, then I'll know that I'm at the Ojai intersection. So that's number 2. I can also do the same off of Fillmore. If I'm off of the 267 degree radial at 22 DME, then I can also identify it. Okay, that's the third way. The fourth way is I would need to be at 9,000 feet, which is the MRA, in order to basically grab this cross radial. So just like what I showed you guys before, this was the same one that we were talking about. Here's the Henner intersection, and if we continue northwestbound, look what's up here, and these numbers magically match, right? The Victor 484 is 9,000 feet, and remember, 9,000 feet is the MEA, and that's going to guarantee you the VOR reception. So that's also the reason why we can see that the MRA is 9,000 feet. What I would need to do is, if that is the only way that I can identify it, I don't have distance measuring equipment, I don't have GPS, I would actually have to ask ATC, hey, I need to climb up to 9,000 in order to, identify the turn, because maybe I'm going to fly Victor 386 597 to Ojai, and then I'm going to make that left-hand turn and basically continue northwestbound. Maybe that's the case, okay? You do need to ask permission to basically climb to that altitude. And then the final way, which is kind of a trick question, if you don't have GPS, if you don't have distance measuring equipment, if you don't have a dual VOR, the last way that you can identify it is you can just ask ATC. Okay, if the gal's not too busy, you can just say, hey, can you let me know when I'm at Ojai? And a lot of times they'll just do it for you. Okay, so that's the final way that you can identify it. So that is known as a minimum reception altitude. A lot of times when you're asked about this, they will ask you the reason, well, why is it 9,000 or 4,000 or whatever the value is? Take a look at the cross radials, and you might have to go up a little ways, and you'll usually see whatever the highest MEA is along the corresponding airway. And that means that if I'm at 9,000 feet and I continue up, I can actually see the Fellows VOR, which is actually a little bit further up over here. This is the Fellows VOR. Okay, so any questions with that before we move on to this last one? Can you identify an intersection with one VOR? Yes, you can, but you do it very, very rapidly. So what you do is you would have to tune and identify the corresponding intersection really, really quickly, spin it up, see if it's there, and then just as quickly you'd have to go back. It's not a great situation to be in. And honestly, if anybody here is operating a VFR only equipped aircraft, you're going to be you guys will be doing quite a bit more work than someone that is like, GPS capable. All right, the final thing that we're going to talk about here is your MTRs. You guys have seen these quite a bit. So these are military training routes. These still also apply in the IFR world. And the military training routes are going to be established for obviously high speed, low altitude flight, and they're generally going to be below 10,000 feet, and they will exceed the typical speed limits that we have to abide by. So they will go faster than 250 knots below 10,000. So you'll be able to see these by either the IR or the VR. So they're very, very similar to what we find on the VFR charts. And they will either be codified based upon the altitude that they fly. So any IRs are obviously our instrument routes. The VRs are going to be the VFR routes. And if you actually look at it on a VFR chart, a lot of them are usually in the exact same locations that are charted VFR. So if you guys remember, if you have, let's say, a visual route with 4 numbers behind it versus a visual route with 3 numbers, if it has the 4-digit combination, I believe that's below 1,500 feet AGL. And if it has a 3-digit combination, then that means it's above 1,500 feet. So the main thing is we do not want to fly, any of the military training routes, the MTRs, for very, very long distances, so that way we can avoid any type of collision or hazard moving forward. Okay. All right, so let's do this. What we'll do is we'll call it a night. It is a Friday. And when we come back on Monday, we're going to finish up the en route section and then move on to the holds. So we only have a few more things. We will talk more about the special use airspace, how to identify airports. We'll also talk about what are known as T routes and Q routes. So some of you have probably already seen these on the chart. We've actually probably already came across a few of these. And what we have here is that some of these, the majority of what you see on these charts are these black lines, which are Victor Airways, and those are based off of the VORs. And then we also have these T routes as well. And the T routes are actually based off of GPS. So if I wanted to fly the T257, then I can only use this if I am GPS equipped. And then the MEA is 7,300 feet, and the G is just reminding you, hey, this is a GPS route, okay? So these are becoming more popular as well, and these are blue in color, and we'll talk more about those. And then we'll also talk about all the other, pros, cons, and everything else, and also all of the other symbols that we didn't get to today. And then be prepared to cover the holds. The holds take quite a bit of time. It usually takes an hour or so, and I will actually have you guys draw about 6 or 7 different holds in the class and see how you guys do. And then from there, we will reverse everything next week, and we'll actually start covering our arrivals, which are pretty short, and then we go into precision approaches and then non-precision approaches. So we'll start dissecting the approach charts as well and start talking about in detail different types of approaches and how they actually operate and all the different nuances and the different types of approaches that are available to us. So with that, I hope everyone enjoyed today's class. We will go ahead and call it a day. So thank you everybody for that, and I hope everyone has a great weekend. I'll stick around for any questions that we have. So Tremaine understood everything except the OROCA. So the OROCA is very, very simple. It's known as an off-route altitude. Let me get back to it real quick here. So many abbreviations. Have a great one, Juanjo. Art, take care. Give me 1 sec, Tremaine, and I'll go back to it here in a second. So if anyone else needs to bug out, have a fantastic night. The recording will be up shortly here, so we'll see everybody back here on Monday. So for anybody that didn't understand the OROCA allows you to fly direct off airway. So anytime we mean off airway, it's basically not flying or following any of these lines. So the lines, as you see, are the Victor Airways or the GPS routes, and they're basically these straight lines with intersections. So if I want to fly off airway, I have to be at or above whatever the OROCA value is. In this case, it's above 11,100 feet. And the only way to fly direct using, or basically not using any of the routing, I actually need to be GPS equipped, and I have to be flying GPS. Okay, hopefully that made sense. Take care, everyone. Jeffrey, take care. Bill, Everett, Oscar, Epi, Serge. Thanks again to the wonderful moderators. We got Missy, Alex, Ryan, and others as well on board. So thank you, thank you, thank you. That makes sense, Tremaine? Thanks again, everybody. Crazy Uncle Bob, Buttons and Gadgets. So have a great night out there. Cam, take care. Merci beaucoup. Juanju, I will take a look at it. I haven't been on Facebook in a day or two. Definitely take a look at it. All right, perfect, Tremaine. Glad that you got that one squared away. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Clear as mud. So at this point, what I would encourage you guys to do is find an en route chart. And of course, if you don't have like a physical paper chart available to you, just go on SkyVector or use whatever your favorite, electronic version of it is, and see what you can identify. Spend some time and see if you can identify an MEA, a MOCA, an OROCA, and some of these others that we looked at today, and even go beyond that. So just like when you guys were learning the VFR sectionals, what I used to tell students to do is very simple. Sit there with the legend on one side and then see what you can identify. And also understand what each one of those acronyms means. What I used to do is actually put them on note cards and then just on the flip side, write down kind of what is actually defined as. And that will also help out with, when it comes to flight planning, what you can do and what you can't do, because you can never go below any of these altitudes. Just remember that, right? So that's kind of the key, where you have to realize what are your capabilities, and a lot of those capabilities are going to be defined by the altitudes that are on the actual en route charts, and then obviously the performance of whatever aircraft you happen to be flying at the moment, right? Okay, so Vlad had a question, and he was asking about the departure procedures. I think I remember the question. Thanks again for reminding me that. I believe it was on the bullet departure. And can you please remind me what the question was, or what specifically about this you didn't understand? Have a great night, Tremaine. Thanks again. So the departure route that we presented, very, very simply, the way that we would basically go through this is we would determine, number one, can we accept this bullet for departure? And the way that I would do that is on a SID, there's a section here that's basically called takeoff minimums. And I need to make sure that my aircraft has the capability to perform or climb at or above whatever the values are. So in this case, the example I gave you is we would be departing from runway 30, the big runway, basically going that direction. And in this case, all I would need to do is maintain 317 feet per nautical mile to 1900 feet. And if you remember, as long as you can use the standard value of 60 knots of ground speed. 60 knots is 317 feet per minute. And then obviously you can kind of ballpark it And of course, I would look more specifically at the climb chart from there. But very simply, a Cessna can do that up to 1,900 feet. That's not a big deal. Let's see. Missy departure, you asked us to route DP around. Okay, got it. So it's not this one. It's actually, you have a good understanding of that. Let me go back to the obstacle departure procedure. All right, so here is the obstacle departure procedure that I had you guys draw. So very simply, you've got a flight plan, and the number one thing that students mess up on, and what I messed up on in real life when I did this, was this right here, okay, where it says aircraft departing the Mission Bay VORTAC, and this is the Mission Bay VORTAC down here. It says radial 090 clockwise, radial 360, climb on course. So aircraft departing the Mission Bay VORTAC, and it's basically between radial 090 clockwise to 360, you're supposed to climb on course. So very simply, what they are effectively saying is that if we look at the radials themselves, so right here is the Mission Bay VORTAC, and here is the 360 degree radial, and here is the 090 degree radial approximately. And the mistake that I made when, after getting my instrument license, is I honestly thought that they wanted me to basically do a DME arc from the 090 degree radial to the 360 degree radial and actually proceed on course. And keep in mind that that is 100% wrong. All they're saying is that if you are, you need to know what your course is. If you're going to be departing anywhere within this area over here, the yellow section between those two radials, then all you do is you fly directly to the Mission Bay VOR, and then you just continue on course. It's that simple. If you're departing in the red section, anywhere outside of that, which is basically from 360 degrees to 090, then they want you to do this extra step where they need you to basically enter a holding pattern and be above 2,300 feet, and then you can proceed on course. And the reason for that, for those that, if you're not familiar with the San Diego area, is in that general direction down there, that is actually a mountainous area. So if we were to pull up San Diego, and let's see, here is Montgomery. Okay, so here's Montgomery Field, which is Gibbs. And very simply, if you kind of picture it, everything within this area over here is that higher altitude where they want you to enter it. And if I look at the VFR chart, let's look at the San Diego chart. So here, once again, is Montgomery. Okay, so this is Montgomery Gibbs, and it makes sense. In this general area, you can see the terrain rises fairly rapidly, so they want to kind of give you a head start. And once again, if you are departing in that general direction, you need to be at or above 2,300 feet. Okay, so does that make sense, though? If you kind of also, look at these things visually and compare, because there is no topography information when we actually look at a IFR chart. It's kind of deceiving. So, if it helps, kind of think about it as there's a lot of mountains over here off to the east. So that's the reason why we need to basically be at this higher altitude. Otherwise, anywhere else, which you can see is fairly flat because it's along the ocean or the coast, we can basically, as soon as we get to the VOR, we can just proceed on course. And based upon our routing that I showed you on the earlier page, you can see that the pink line clearly is based off of, 310 degrees is our outbound from the VOR. So we're basically heading northbound on 310 degrees, which is definitely well before 360. It's within the 090 to 360. Okay. And then also keep in mind, Vlad, and anybody else that's listening, the other way that you can also see that is you've got, you will either have CW, right, which is clockwise, or you might see counterclockwise, okay, which is CCW. So clockwise is CW, and then in the book they have CCW, which is counterclockwise, which would obviously be the opposite direction. You're welcome, though. Yeah, if you were paying attention to what not to do, that just make sure don't do what I accidentally almost did. All right. Any other questions for the weekend here? Take care, Moses. Have a good one. Easy peasy, right? Yeah, I agree too. A lot of times I also have students, Missy, like when I was teaching the CFI material, the CFII material, I would actually encourage students to take a look at the VFR charts because the IFR routes, sometimes they just put you in like the worst positions, right? Like the one that I didn't like, you know, if you accept some of the tech routes, you've probably seen them too. There's the one from, what is it called? There is an actual tech route out to San Diego as well, and I never liked this one. It's like at 5,000 feet or something, or 4,000 feet, and it takes you to Catalina out in the middle of nowhere, right? And then you actually have to follow the Victor Airway back inland. So some of these Victor Airways, they're not gonna make you comfortable at the end of the day. It's not about getting you close to an airport or anything like that. So, you know, it's always wise to figure out what the heck you're actually flying over, which is a bunch of water at this case. Have a great night. Vlad, Bill, have a good one as well. Time for a beer. Pretty good myself. And video will be up very shortly. All right, everybody, if there's no more questions, thanks again to all the moderators out there. Do appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend. We'll see everybody back here on Monday, 5 p.m., and we'll basically push forward with the rest of what you're going to be able to find on the IFR charts. And then we'll start talking about the world of holds. So with that, stay safe, everyone, and we'll see everyone back here on Monday.